Imagine for a moment a world untouched by human conscience. A world where nothing was ever regretted, and no decision carried the weight of right or wrong. The only law was survival. The only judge was hunger, fear, and instinct. Before the birth of guilt, Earth was alive but silent in a peculiar way, a silence not of sound, but of meaning. Millions of years ago, long before we learned to question ourselves, the planet belonged to creatures who lived without reflection. The forest canopy echoed with the cries of primates, the plains trembled under the feet of ancient elephants and herds of antelope, and predators stalked with a precision honed by instinct alone. But none of them, not even our earliest ancestors, paused to wonder whether their actions were right. The lion does not feel guilty for the zebra it kills. The zebra does not regret fleeing and leaving weaker members behind. And the chimpanzee, though capable of bursts of empathy, does not lie awake remembering the violence it committed hours earlier. This was the world before guilt. A raw, immediate existence. Actions came and went like flashes of lightning, with no lingering shadow afterward. And into this world, the first humans slowly began to emerge. Picture one of them. Not yet Homo sapiens as we know ourselves today, but some distant forebear, wandering the African savanna. Their eyes scan the grasslands for threats, their stomach aches with hunger, their heart pounds with the constant rhythm of survival. They know danger, they know fear, they know desire. But what they do not know, not yet, is guilt. If they take food from another, it is only instinct. If they abandon a wounded kin, it is only necessity. Their nights are dreamless, their dawns untroubled by yesterday's choices. And yet, something is stirring. This stirring is what makes the human story different from every other creature's. Slowly, over millions of years, a new kind of awareness was brewing. It began not in grand moral declarations, but in the smallest moments. A glance held too long, a whimper from a child left behind, the haunting recognition in another's eyes. Somewhere deep in the recesses of the evolving human brain, a shift was beginning. And one day, that shift would give birth to the emotion we now call guilt. But before we rush forward into that story, we must linger here, in this world without it. Because only by imagining the absence of guilt can we appreciate its eventual arrival. What was life like when no one ever felt the need to say, "I am sorry"? When the language of regret had not yet been invented? It was a life of clarity, perhaps even simplicity. Every action was justified by its outcome: survive, eat, protect, reproduce. If a mistake was made, the cost was immediate: injury, hunger, death. But there was no lingering weight, no gnawing self-condemnation. Once the danger had passed, life simply moved forward, unburdened. From one perspective, such a life might even seem enviable. Imagine never regretting a word you spoke in anger. Imagine never replaying a decision that hurt someone you love. Imagine never waking in the night to the ache of remorse. In this prehistoric silence, life was harsh but also free from the invisible chains we carry today. And yet, this silence came at a cost. Without guilt, there was no true accountability. Without accountability, bonds of trust could only be fragile. Early humans may have lived side by side, but something was missing, something that could hold them together not just in the moment of need, but in the memory of their actions. This absence is what guilt would eventually fill. Guilt is not only the recognition that we have done harm, it is the tether that ties us to others across time. It is the invisible thread that reminds us, I mattered to them, and they mattered to me. In the silence before guilt, these threads were not yet woven. Think again of our early ancestors, moving across the plains. They hunted, they gathered, they fought, they fled. At night, they rested under the stars, untroubled by yesterday. And still, in the darkness of their evolving minds, the seeds were germinating. Larger brains meant longer memories. Longer memories meant the ability to replay events, to imagine different outcomes, to feel the sting of having done something that could not be undone. It is in that space, between instinct and reflection, that guilt would one day be born. But in this opening chapter, we remain with the world before it. We walk alongside creatures who do not yet know what it means to regret. We listen to their silence, a silence not broken by confession or apology, but only by the sounds of survival, the rustle of grass, the crack of bones, the rush of blood in the ears. This silence, though, is not permanent. Like a storm building on the horizon, something is coming. And when it arrives, it will change the human story forever. Because once guilt entered the world, nothing would ever be the same again. We would carry our past inside us. We would measure ourselves not only by what we achieved, but by what we failed to do. We would invent apologies, rituals, and justice systems. We would imagine gods watching us, spirits haunting us, ancestors judging us. All of that begins with the first shadow of guilt. So here, in this moment before, we take one last breath of that silence. We allow ourselves to imagine what it was like to live without it, to be unburdened, untroubled, untouched by the ache of regret. And then we step forward, toward firelight, toward memory, toward story, toward the first time a human heart grew heavy with guilt. If we want to understand the birth of guilt, we must begin not with us, but with those who walked before us. The long shadow of guilt does not begin suddenly, it stretches backward into deep time, cast by creatures whose faces we might not recognize, but whose hands, movements, and fears were already faintly human. Close your eyes and imagine a riverbank 3 million years ago. Along the water's edge, a small band of Australopithecus gathers. Their bodies are smaller than ours, their arms longer, their brains barely a third the size of what we now carry in our skulls. And yet, in their eyes, something glimmers: curiosity, recognition, perhaps even care. A mother cradles her infant, grooming its hair for ticks. Another individual cracks a nut against a stone while others watch and learn. A young one ventures too close to the river, and a sudden splash sends everyone scrambling back, alarm cries echoing through the air. Survival governs every choice, yet within these moments, we glimpse the roots of something more. For Australopithecus, and later for Homo habilis, the handyman, who first shaped stone into tools, life was not purely mechanical. There were bonds, alliances, affections. Mothers protected their children fiercely. Males formed coalitions not unlike modern chimpanzees. And when one of their own died, evidence suggests the group sometimes lingered near the body, unwilling to leave. Was it grief? Was it instinct? Or was it the earliest stirring of a feeling that actions, or failures to act, mattered? Here, in these shadows of the ancestors, lies the beginning of our moral landscape. At this stage, guilt did not yet exist as we know it. These creatures could not look back across years of memory, nor judge themselves by invisible standards. But they carried within them the early architecture, empathy, recognition, and memory, that would one day make guilt possible. When one individual stole food from another, perhaps the victim felt anger, perhaps the thief felt fear. But somewhere in the evolving mind, a connection was being drawn. I hurt them. They looked at me differently afterward. That recognition, however fleeting, is the soil from which guilt would grow. We often underestimate just how radical these first steps were. For millions of years, life on Earth had been guided by instinct alone. Then, slowly, among these small-bodied primates, something began to shift. Social life became more intricate. Cooperation mattered more than brute force. To hunt together, to share food, to protect the vulnerable, these acts required more than reflex. They required trust. And trust could be broken. Archaeology gives us tantalizing fragments of this story. Simple stone flakes tell us that Homo habilis was thinking ahead, preparing tools not just for the immediate moment, but for future use. This ability to imagine the future is the same mental power that later allowed us to look back and feel guilt. A brain that can hold yesterday and tomorrow together is a brain that can weigh consequence. Consider a scene among Homo erectus nearly 2 million years ago. They have mastered fire, they hunt larger game, they travel farther than their ancestors. One hunter fails to strike cleanly, and an animal escapes. Another hoards meat instead of sharing. The group reacts with frustration, perhaps even with violence. The selfish individual learns a lesson: behavior has social costs. But was there an inner voice, a flicker of shame, a restless discomfort afterward? We cannot know for certain. Yet the groundwork was being laid. This slow layering of social complexity is what makes guilt possible. To feel guilty, one must first care about what others think. To care about what others think, one must first recognize the self, not just as a body moving through the world, but as a being seen by others. Australopithecus may not have had this awareness. Homo habilis may have only touched it in flashes. But by the time of Homo erectus, the mirror of the mind was beginning to clear. Anthropologists often look at modern primates for clues. Chimpanzees, for example, show signs of reconciliation after conflict. One chimp may attack another in a burst of anger, only to later offer gestures of appeasement, grooming, play, or submission. Is this guilt? Perhaps not in the human sense, but it is a step toward it. It is an acknowledgement. What I did changed something between us, and I want to repair it. If chimps can show this, then surely our ancestors, with brains larger and social lives more intricate, carried these seeds even further. Guilt did not emerge from nothing. It evolved piece by piece, from behaviors that kept groups together. Those who could maintain bonds survived. Those who alienated everyone around them faced exile or death. And so guilt was not just an emotion waiting to be discovered. It was an evolutionary strategy, slowly sculpted by the pressures of survival. In the shadows of our ancestors, the first outlines of it were already visible. But let us not romanticize too quickly. Life in these early groups was brutal. Competition for mates, resources, and dominance often turned violent. Fossilized bones reveal fractures, wounds, even evidence of cannibalism. These were not peaceful utopias. They were precarious, fragile lives where cooperation was balanced against conflict. And yet, within that tension, something remarkable was happening. Imagine the moment an early human mother saw another's child in danger and felt compelled to help. Imagine a young male stealing food, only to avoid the gaze of others afterward, uneasy, though he did not know why. Imagine the group rallying to protect a wounded member, not because instinct commanded it, but because something deeper, something like care, bound them together. These moments are the shadows of the ancestors. Not guilt as we know it, but the faint outlines of its shape. A recognition that I and we are connected. That what I do echoes in the lives of others. By the time Homo erectus raised their eyes to the horizon, walking farther than any hominin before, the human story was no longer just about survival. It was about connection, memory, and recognition. The stage was set. The silence of instinct was cracking. Soon, those cracks would widen, and into them guilt would flow like water. And so we leave the riverbanks and hunting grounds of our ancestors, carrying with us the knowledge that guilt did not arrive suddenly. It crept forward slowly, in the shadows of the past, a seed planted long before it blossomed fully, a whisper before it became a voice. If there was ever a single invention that pulled us out of the shadows of instinct and into the realm of reflection, it was fire. Picture the scene, a small circle of early humans huddled against the night. Beyond the reach of the flames, the world is darkness, filled with the whispers of predators, the movement of wind through tall grass, the howl of unseen beasts. But here, within the fire's glow, there is light. There is warmth. There is safety. For the first time, the night does not belong to the wilderness. It belongs to us. The mastery of fire was more than a technological breakthrough. It was a revolution of the mind. For fire gave us not just heat to ward off cold and cook our food, but a stage, a place where faces could be seen, where eyes could meet, where expressions became stories. By firelight, humans began to look at each other differently. And in that gaze, something remarkable began to grow. During the day, survival demanded action, hunting, gathering, tool-making, vigilance. But at night, gathered around the flames, there was time to breathe, time to notice, time to reflect. Around the fire, conversation was born, first in gestures, later in words. Around the fire, laughter echoed, songs rose, tales were told. And around the fire, people began to imagine not just themselves, but one another. Imagine the flickering light casting shadows across a young hunter's face as he recalls the day's chase. His gestures animate the story, his companions laugh or gasp, and for the first time, there is a shared memory, a collective understanding. These stories are not just information, they are beginnings of morality. Because once a group can remember together, it can also judge together. By the fire, a new kind of awareness takes root. To sit across from another and watch their face illuminated in the flames is to realize they are more than just a moving body. They have thoughts, feelings, expectations. They can be disappointed. They can be hurt. And their gaze, fixed upon you, lingers even after the fire dies down. This is the soil in which guilt takes root, in the recognition that others are watching, remembering, and feeling. Anthropologists often argue that fire lengthened the human day. With light at night, humans had more hours to interact, to plan, to dream. But those hours were not only practical, they were emotional. They were the hours when we began to replay our own actions in the presence of others. Sitting quietly, staring into the embers, an early human could remember, the food I did not share, the blow I struck in anger, the look in another's eyes when I turned away. The fire was not only a source of warmth, it was a mirror. Consider how memory works in this setting. Fire encourages storytelling, and storytelling preserves events. But in retelling, stories do more than recall facts, they shape judgments. If someone tells of a failed hunt, the group may laugh, or sigh, or frown. In their reactions, the hunter learns not just that he failed, but that his failure mattered to others. The beginnings of guilt are entwined with this communal gaze. And think of children growing up by the fire. They hear stories of bravery and generosity, of selfishness and betrayal. These tales are not yet myths or legends, but they are moral lessons all the same. Around the flames, a child learns that actions have meaning, not only in terms of survival, but in terms of belonging. To be mocked is painful. To be praised is sweet. To be remembered for kindness is to carry honor. To be remembered for cruelty is to carry shame. It is in this fire-lit crucible that shame and guilt begin to separate. Shame is born when the eyes of others weigh upon you. Guilt is born when you carry those eyes inside yourself long after they are gone. Both begin here, in the circle of light, where no one can hide and where every flicker of expression is visible. Archaeological evidence supports this transformation. The earliest clear signs of controlled fire, hearths, charred bones, blackened stones, date back at least 400,000 years, possibly much earlier. From that moment on, the human night changed forever. Around these hearths, life slowed, minds wandered, imaginations expanded. We cannot excavate guilt directly, but we can see the stage upon which it first appeared. The symbolism of fire runs deep. Even today, fire is a place of gathering, of storytelling, of reflection. We sit around campfires and confess secrets, share laughter, recall memories. In prehistoric times, this was even more powerful. Fire was life, but it was also intimacy. To share fire was to share trust. To be excluded from the fire's circle was to face the night alone. Few punishments could have been harsher. And exclusion is the other side of guilt. Once the fire became the center of human life, the fear of being cast out became real. To hurt another, to betray trust, was to risk the unbearable isolation in the dark. Guilt is not only the recognition of harm done, it is the fear of losing the warmth of others, the light of the fire. We can imagine one of those first guilty moments. A young man hoards a piece of roasted meat, keeping it from his companions. At the time, his hunger drives him. But later, sitting in the circle of fire, he feels the weight of their eyes. He notices their silence. He remembers the child who went hungry. The meat is gone, but the memory lingers, and with it, a restless unease. That unease is the seed of guilt. Fire did not create guilt directly, but it created the conditions for it to flourish. It gave us faces to watch, stories to share, silences to fill, and memories to carry. In the firelight, we saw each other not as fleeting shapes, but as beings with minds and hearts. And in their eyes, we began to see ourselves. So when we speak of the birth of guilt, we must speak of fire. For it was by firelight that humans first stepped into a new kind of night, a night not only of survival, but of conscience. A night in which the flames burned not just in wood and grass, but in the fragile and flickering chambers of the human mind. If guilt is the weight of having crossed a line, then we must ask, what were the first lines ever crossed? In the beginning, before rules were written, before laws were carved, the only boundaries were survival and trust. Yet even in those early days, people must have broken one another's fragile expectations. These breaches, small, ordinary, human, were the first transgressions. Imagine a band of early humans returning from a hunt. Their faces are hollow with hunger. They have worked together all day, tracking, chasing, risking injury. At last, the prey is brought down. The meat is divided, and each expects their share. But one individual, stronger or greedier, hides away a portion. No words are spoken yet, perhaps language is still in its infancy, but eyes notice. The act has been seen. What follows? Perhaps anger. Perhaps confrontation. Perhaps violence. Or perhaps only silence, a silence heavier than the air around the fire. The thief eats, but the taste of food is different when eaten under the gaze of others. And later in the night, when the fire has burned low, maybe there comes a stirring, a restlessness, the recognition, I took more than I should have. They know it. They look at me differently now. That stirring is not yet guilt in its fully human form, but it is its ancestor. It is the awareness of transgression. Consider another scene, drawn not from imagination alone but from anthropology. Among hunter-gatherer societies observed in recent centuries, food sharing is often the central moral code. To hoard is to betray. To fail to share is to place the group at risk. Survival depends on reciprocity. In such worlds, the greatest wrong is selfishness. We can reasonably assume the same was true for our ancestors. The first moral lessons may have been whispered not in words, but in the eyes of those who noticed whether you gave or withheld. But transgressions were not only about food, they were also about trust. Picture a moment of danger. A lion appears at the edge of the camp. The group scatters. One man, instead of helping, pushes another aside in his rush to escape. The lion does not attack. The group regathers. But everyone remembers what he did. The next time their eyes meet, there is something between them, a crack, invisible but real. Perhaps the man feels it too. Perhaps he avoids their gaze. Perhaps, for the first time, he begins to replay his action in his mind. It is here, in these everyday breaches, that guilt begins to form, not in grand betrayals, but in the small moments when someone realizes they acted against the trust of others. The archaeological record offers us glimpses that align with these stories: broken tools left in caves, bones suggesting abandonment of the weak, caches of food hidden away. We cannot know their exact context, but we can imagine, where there are human groups, there are expectations. And where there are expectations, there are transgressions. The transition from instinct to morality is not a clean line. Other animals also cheat and are punished. Chimpanzees, for example, sometimes take food from others, and the group reacts with aggression. But what is uniquely human is the inward echo that follows. At some point, our ancestors stopped being governed only by immediate fear of retaliation. They began to carry the awareness of their actions even when no one was striking them, even when the moment had passed. That inward echo is the beginning of guilt. Imagine a young woman who breaks a tool borrowed from another. She hides it, afraid of scolding. Yet when she sees the other searching for it, her heart beats faster. The broken stone is gone, but the memory remains. She knows she has done something wrong, even if no one confronts her. That knowledge, unshakable and gnawing, is guilt in its first fragile form. Why did such feelings evolve? Because they served the group. In small bands of humans, survival depended on trust. Too many betrayals and the group fractured. Too much selfishness and the weak starved. Natural selection favored those who felt uneasy after transgressions, those who sought to repair bonds. Guilt, painful as it is, became a glue. Yet in its earliest days, guilt was not clean. It mixed with fear, shame, and anger. It was not yet an organized moral system. It was a shadow, a weight in the chest, a memory that would not leave. Think of a prehistoric child. He disobeys, wandering too far from the camp. He returns unharmed, but his mother's face is stricken. She pulls him close, scolds, perhaps weeps. The child does not only feel fear of punishment, he feels something deeper, a recognition that he caused her pain. In that recognition lies the seed of guilt, and with it, the earliest understanding of morality: my actions affect others. The first transgressions were not great crimes. They were stolen berries, broken tools, failures to help, moments of selfishness. Yet they mattered deeply, because in small groups, every action was amplified. And slowly, these moments carved pathways in the human mind. They created the habit of reflection, of imagining not only what we did, but what others felt when we did it. When we imagine the very first time a human felt guilt, it may not have been about violence or death. It may have been something almost laughably small, a stolen piece of meat, a broken promise, a moment of cowardice. And yet, for the one who felt it, it was immense. For the first time, the weight of the self pressed inward. For the first time, the heart carried a memory like a stone. And so, the story of guilt begins not with gods or laws, but with ordinary transgressions, with fragile trust betrayed, with small moments that echoed in the firelight. From there, the emotion would grow, becoming more complex, more relentless, shaping the very destiny of our species. But before that destiny unfolds, we must step into darker territory. Because guilt was not only born from small transgressions, it was carved in blood, in death, and in the haunting silence of lives lost too soon. If guilt was seated in small betrayals, it blossomed in the presence of death. Few things cut deeper into the human spirit than the loss of one of our own. And it may be here, at the edge of the grave, that the weight of remorse first became unbearable. Imagine a band of early humans gathered in silence. Before them lies the still body of a companion, perhaps a child who did not survive the night, perhaps an elder struck down by illness, perhaps a hunter who fell in the chase. Around them, the world continues. Birds call. The wind moves through the grass. But within the group, something is different. Something has stopped. Archaeology gives us fragments of this moment. In caves across Europe and the Middle East, traces of deliberate burials appear in the record, bodies placed with care, sometimes with tools or flowers, sometimes with ochre sprinkled across them. These were not casual disposals of the dead. They were rituals, signs that the living carried feelings about the departed. But what were those feelings? Grief, certainly. Love, perhaps. But also, possibly, guilt. To lose someone is to face 1,000 unspoken questions. Did we protect them enough? Should we have shared more food? Could we have prevented their suffering? These questions echo in us even today, in hospital rooms and funeral halls. And if we feel them so sharply, is it not possible that our ancestors felt their first stirrings tens of thousands of years ago? Consider the case of Shanidar Cave in Iraq, where Neanderthal remains show evidence of burial and care. One skeleton, Shanidar I, bore severe disabilities, a withered arm, blindness in one eye, injuries that would have made survival alone impossible. Yet this individual lived for years, kept alive by the attention of the group. When he finally died, he was buried. What did his companions feel as they covered his body with earth? Pride in having cared for him? Sadness at his loss? Or perhaps, alongside love, a shadow of guilt? Did we do enough? Did we falter in our care? The burial itself may have been an answer. To lay a body in the ground with care is to say, we did not forget you. We honor you. We atone in some way for whatever failings haunted us. Burial is both remembrance and repair. But not every death in prehistory was peaceful. Many were violent. Archaeological sites reveal cracked skulls, shattered ribs, signs of murder and massacre. When one group clashed with another, when blood was spilled within the clan itself, the survivors must have carried a heavier burden still. To kill a stranger is one thing. To kill someone you once laughed with by the fire, that is different. Did those killers feel guilt? Or only fear of retaliation? We cannot be sure. But what about those who stood by, who did not intervene, who later looked upon the body and felt the ache of regret? Perhaps guilt was born not only in the hands that struck the blow, but in the hearts that failed to stop it. Even natural deaths could carry guilt's weight. Consider the mother who lost her child to sickness. Did she ask herself, was it my fault? Did I neglect something? Did I fail in my duty? These questions are eternal, stretching from the caves of prehistory to the corridors of modern hospitals. Guilt is the ghost that walks beside grief. And grief, in its rituals, may have been humanity's first conversation with guilt. Picture an ancient burial, the body placed carefully in a shallow pit, covered with ochre, a few possessions tucked beside it. Around the grave, the living stand in silence. The act of burial is not only practical, it is symbolic. It says, you mattered. And perhaps it also says, forgive us. Forgive us for what we could not do. Forgive us for the food we could not give, the illness we could not cure, the danger we could not prevent. Forgive us for surviving when you did not. This last thought, survivor's guilt, may be among the oldest forms of the emotion. When members of a group died and others lived, the survivors must have wondered, why them and not me? In the stillness of the grave, the living carried questions that had no answers. Even today, funerals carry echoes of this ancient burden. We speak apologies to the dead. We wish we had said more, done more, loved more. We stand at gravesides and whisper words that cannot be heard, hoping they will somehow cross the silence. These rituals are not new. They are ancient. They are the continuation of a dialogue that began when humans first placed a body into the earth. In this way, death was not only an end. It was a mirror. It forced our ancestors to confront the fragility of life, the limits of their protection, the failures of their choices. And in that confrontation, guilt was born anew each time someone died. We should not imagine, though, that guilt was the same for them as it is for us. Their lives were shorter, harsher, more fragile. Death was everywhere. Perhaps they did not torment themselves endlessly with what-ifs as we do. But even in a world of constant loss, certain deaths must have struck differently. A child too young, a companion lost to a mistake, an elder abandoned in weakness. These deaths may have left behind not just grief, but the ache of responsibility. And it was in that ache that humans began to seek ways to heal. Burial was one way. Rituals were another. Perhaps songs were sung, or gestures made, or stories told to soften the pain. These acts were not just for the dead, but for the living, to ease the weight of guilt by transforming it into honor, memory, and meaning. So we see in death both the cruelty of life and the tenderness of humanity. We see the beginnings of conscience, not written in laws or carved in stone, but felt in the silence around the body of a loved one. Guilt, then, is not only the recognition of harm done. It is also the recognition of what we failed to prevent, what we could not save, what we let slip through our fingers. It is born in absence as much as in action. And death, the great absence, has always been its deepest well. From the first burials to the most elaborate rituals, from the tears of mothers to the regrets of hunters, guilt and grief have walked hand in hand through human history. Together, they shaped us into the creatures who remember, who question, who ache for what might have been. The next step in our story is memory itself, the strange ability to replay the past inside our minds, to live it again long after it has ended. Without memory, guilt cannot exist. With memory, guilt becomes inescapable. If guilt is a shadow, then memory is the light that casts it. Without memory, no regret could take root, no mistake could haunt us, no loss could linger in the mind long after the moment has passed. To understand the first time a human felt guilt, we must turn to one of the most astonishing abilities our species developed, the power to remember in detail, to hold on to images of the past and replay them within the theater of the mind. Other animals remember in simple ways. A predator recalls where prey often gathers. A bird remembers the route of migration. But these are narrow, functional memories, tuned only to survival. Human memory is different. It is expansive, layered, and deeply emotional. We do not just remember where the river is, we remember the day we almost drowned in it, the sound of a sibling's laughter beside the water, the face of the elder who pulled us to safety. Memory binds events not just to action, but to feeling. And once memory entwines itself with emotion, guilt becomes possible. Imagine one of our early ancestors sitting by the fire. The day's hunt is over, but he cannot sleep. In his mind, he replays the moment his spear flew wide and struck the wrong target. Perhaps it wounded an animal needlessly. Perhaps it frightened the group and spoiled the hunt. The others have moved on, but in the hunter's mind, the scene lives again. His body remembers the failure. His chest tightens. He feels the weight of having done wrong. This is guilt born from memory. Or picture a mother who lost her child to illness. She remembers not only the loss itself, but the days before, the cough she dismissed, the fever she hoped would break, the moment she turned away when she should have held closer. These images return to her in the nights that follow, replayed with cruel precision. Memory gives her no rest. And in that endless replay, guilt is sharpened into something nearly unbearable. Memory makes mistakes permanent. It is not the wound itself that lasts, but the story we tell ourselves afterward, the things we should have done, the choices we should have made. With memory, the past does not stay behind us. It follows us. It whispers to us. It reminds us. But memory was not only a burden. It was also a gift. It allowed humans to learn from mistakes, to avoid repeating them, to pass lessons down through generations. A hunter who remembered the cost of reckless action might move with greater care next time. A mother who remembered the signs of illness might save another child. Memory carried pain, but it also carried wisdom. Guilt, therefore, was not meaningless suffering. It was a teacher. Archaeological traces give us glimpses of this early memory culture. Cave paintings, for instance, may not only have been art or ritual, they may have been records, memories preserved on stone. The hunters who painted bison and deer on cave walls may have been saying, "Remember this hunt. Remember the way we moved. Remember what worked and what failed." These paintings are more than images. They are echoes of memory, shared to guide the living and honor the past. Even burial sites, with their careful arrangements of bones and objects, may have been acts of memory. To place a tool beside the dead is to say, this was part of who they were. Remember them this way. Memory preserved through ritual kept the dead alive in story, if not in body. And yet, memory has a cruel edge. Unlike instinct, which guides without pain, memory can torment. It brings back not only what was useful, but what was lost. It replays not only triumphs, but failures. It forces us to live again the moments we most wish to forget. Guilt and memory, in this way, form a bond. Memory ensures that guilt survives long after the moment of error has passed. Perhaps the most haunting form of early memory was not the recollection of events, but the realization of permanence. To remember someone who had died was also to realize they were gone forever. Memory preserved their voice, their gestures, their presence. But the more vividly they lived in memory, the more painfully their absence was felt. Out of this tension, remembering what cannot return, guilt often grows. Consider how survivors' guilt might have first taken shape. A group flees from danger, but not all escape. Around the fire that night, the survivors replay the scene in their minds. They see again the face of the one who fell behind. They hear the cries. They remember their own decision to run faster, to not turn back. The memory loops, uninvited, night after night. And with each replay, guilt deepens. Over time, memory itself became a defining feature of humanity. It allowed us to build culture, to create continuity, to imagine history. But in the earliest days, it may have been terrifying. To be the first creatures capable of holding such vivid recollections meant also being the first to be haunted by them. Some anthropologists suggest that the dawn of storytelling was, in part, a way to manage memory. By turning individual recollections into communal tales, the burden was shared. The story no longer lived only in one mind, gnawing in the dark hours. It was spoken aloud, carried by many voices, reshaped into lesson or myth. In this way, memory was transformed, and with it, guilt became not only personal but collective. And so, the birth of memory was both a gift and a curse. It gave humans the power to learn, to grow, to connect across generations. But it also gave us the power to regret, to torment ourselves with visions of the past, to feel the sharp edge of guilt long after the moment had passed. Without memory, guilt cannot exist. With memory, guilt is eternal. It waits for us in the quiet hours, when the fire has burned low, when the hunt is over, when the child is gone. It comes in dreams, in sudden flashes, in echoes we cannot silence. It was in memory's mirror that early humans first saw themselves clearly, not only as hunters and gatherers, not only as survivors of a harsh world, but as moral beings capable of feeling the weight of choices long after the moment had passed. The stage was set. With memory secured in the mind, guilt could now deepen into something even more complex, the recognition of harm, not just to individuals, but to the group as a whole. That next step, the link between guilt and survival, would shape the very fabric of human society. To most of us today, guilt feels like a personal weight, a private burden, a shadow we carry within our own minds. But in the long arc of human evolution, guilt was never just about the individual. It was a survival strategy, a force that shaped how groups of early humans lived together, cooperated, and endured in a hostile world. Survival in the Paleolithic was never guaranteed. Every day, early humans faced hunger, predators, injuries, rival groups, and the brutal unpredictability of nature. No one person could thrive alone. A single hunter could not bring down a mammoth. A single gatherer could not feed a clan through a barren season. A single mother, on her own, could not always protect her child. Survival was communal. It was collective. It depended on cooperation, trust, and loyalty. But cooperation comes at a cost. It demands restraint. It requires the individual to sometimes put the needs of the group above their own. And this is where guilt enters the story. Imagine a small band of early humans gathered in the cold shadow of a cave. They have returned from a hunt, but not everyone has eaten. One man, stronger and faster than the others, has taken more than his share of meat. At first, he feels only satisfaction, his hunger sated. But then he sees the eyes of a child watching hungrily, the hollow cheeks of an elder left without food. In that moment, something shifts. A discomfort gnaws at him. His body grows uneasy, his thoughts replay the choice he made. He feels guilt. That guilt is not meaningless suffering. It is a signal, a message encoded by evolution, whispering, if you act only for yourself, you endanger the group. If the group suffers, you will suffer too. Guilt becomes a thread tying the individual's survival to the group's survival. This invisible thread gave humans an advantage. Other animals cooperate through instinct or dominance. Wolves hunt together, but their hierarchy is enforced by power and submission. Ants work for the colony, but only because they are genetically wired to do so. Humans, however, had something different. The emotional glue of guilt and its counterpart, empathy. These emotions made cooperation not just a command but a felt necessity. They ensured that when one failed the group, the sting of guilt pushed them to repair the damage, to do better, to give back. Consider what might have happened without guilt. A group member steals food, hoards resources, refuses to share. If no inner discomfort follows, then selfishness spreads unchecked. The group fractures, trust dissolves. And in the dangerous landscapes of prehistory, a fractured group was often a doomed one. Lions hunted the weak, winters killed the unprepared, rival tribes destroyed the divided. But guilt served as an inner guardrail. It discouraged the behaviors that threatened group survival. It did so silently, from within. No need for constant external punishment when the mind itself could punish with memory and unease. In this way, guilt functioned as an invisible law, long before laws were written, long before elders carved rules into stone or priests recited commandments. We see hints of this survival strategy in modern hunter-gatherer societies. Anthropologists observing the Inuit, the San of the Kalahari, or the Hadza of Tanzania have noted how sharing is not just encouraged, it is expected. Hoarding or selfishness is met not with violent punishment but with disapproval, with teasing, with subtle reminders designed to spark guilt. The individual is reminded that the group sees, that the group remembers. And under that watchful gaze, guilt often blossoms. But guilt was not only about sharing food, it extended into other realms of survival. A hunter who failed to warn the group of danger, a mother who neglected a child, a scout who fell asleep while on watch, these mistakes endangered everyone. Memory replayed the error, and guilt reinforced the lesson: be vigilant. Be responsible. Your choices matter beyond yourself. Over time, guilt became a social glue. It tied individuals to the collective, not only through fear of punishment, but through an inner desire to maintain belonging. To feel guilt was to feel the tug of connection, the reminder that you were part of something larger than yourself. But guilt also carried a duality. It was a tool for survival, yes, but it could also be weaponized. Within groups, guilt could be used to pressure conformity, to enforce obedience, to control behavior. Elders might remind the young of their debts. Mothers might invoke guilt to keep sons close. Leaders might use it to strengthen loyalty. What began as an evolutionary survival mechanism slowly transformed into a cultural force. The very wordless sigh of guilt may have laid the foundation for morality. For the first time, humans began to understand not just what was useful, but what was right. The hunter who shared food was not merely ensuring survival, he was acting good. The one who hoarded was not merely endangering the group, he was acting wrong. Guilt was the bridge that carried survival into morality, necessity into virtue. This survival strategy may explain why guilt feels so physical, why it twists the stomach, tightens the chest, quickens the pulse. Evolution shaped it not as an abstract thought but as a visceral signal, impossible to ignore. Just as hunger drives us to eat, guilt drives us to repair. It was not meant to be comfortable. It was meant to be compelling. And yet, guilt is not perfect. It can misfire. It can overreach. A person can feel guilt even when they have done nothing wrong, for surviving when others did not, for being spared while another suffered. This excess is the cost of a system designed to be ever watchful, ever alert to the dangers of selfishness. It is the side effect of a tool that once ensured our ancestors' survival. Even today, in our vast and complex societies, the same pattern endures. Guilt drives us to apologize, to mend relationships, to return what we have taken, to share what we have. It still ties us to groups, families, communities, nations, reminding us that survival, even now, is never truly individual. In the caves and grasslands of prehistory, guilt was not a burden. It was a beacon. It warned, corrected, restrained, and repaired. It told early humans what no elder could tell them every moment of the day: you belong to this group. Their survival is your survival. If you harm them, you harm yourself. It is difficult to imagine a more powerful survival strategy. And so, in the story of guilt, we see the story of humanity itself, the lonely individual tethered to the fragile group, bound by memory, bound by empathy, bound by the invisible thread of responsibility. Without guilt, humanity might have splintered and vanished, just another clever primate lost to time. With guilt, we endured. With guilt, we stayed together. With guilt, we became more than animals struggling for survival. We became humans, shaping not just our lives, but our shared destiny. Fire was more than a discovery, it was a revolution of the spirit. When the first sparks were tamed, humanity stepped into a new relationship with nature, no longer mere prey or wanderers in the dark, but custodians of a power that could both sustain and destroy. And within that glow of flame, guilt found new terrain. For fire did not only warm the body or cook the flesh of animals, it illuminated the conscience. Picture an early night on the African savanna, perhaps 400,000 years ago. A group of hominins huddles around a small fire, their faces lit in trembling orange. The flames crackle, shadows stretch across the rocks. For the first time, the dark is held at bay. For the first time, the group feels the security of light that predators avoid. Around this fire, food is cooked, stories are murmured, bonds are forged. But fire also magnified responsibility. It demanded vigilance. Left untended, it died. Left uncontrolled, it spread and devoured. To carry fire was to hold both promise and peril in one's hands. And with this responsibility came the potential for guilt. Imagine the one assigned to guard the fire through the night. Sleep overcomes him. When dawn breaks, only ash remains. The group stirs in hunger and frustration. In that failure, guilt burns as fiercely as the flames once did. Fire became a mirror for conscience because it revealed consequences so clearly. Without it, the cold was unbearable, food less nourishing, predators emboldened. To neglect fire was not a private mistake, it endangered everyone. In this way, guilt was sharpened, refined by the flame. Every ember lost, every blaze mishandled, etched responsibility deeper into human memory. But fire was also a stage. Around it, humans looked inward in ways no animal ever had. For the first time, shadows flickered across cave walls, casting shapes that invited imagination. In those hours, long after the hunt, long after the gathering, there was time to reflect, time to replay choices, time to think not only about survival, but about meaning. Guilt thrived in these reflections. A hunter could sit by the fire and see again the eyes of the child who went hungry. A mother could hear the cry of the infant she could not soothe. Memory lingered in the glow, refusing to vanish into the dark. Some anthropologists argue that fire did more than cook meat, it cooked the human mind. By extending the day into night, it created a space for thought, story, and emotion to deepen. Fire carved a sanctuary for guilt to live and grow. Without it, guilt may have remained only a fleeting pang. With it, guilt became a story retold, a feeling revisited, a lesson carried forward. There is also a ritual dimension. Fire became central in ceremonies, offerings, and acts of atonement. To throw food into the flames was not only sacrifice, it was apology. It was a way of saying to unseen forces, to the spirits of animals, or to the ancestors, we remember, we regret, forgive us. Here, guilt expanded beyond the human group and into the cosmos itself. We find echoes of this even in later myths. Prometheus steals fire from the gods and suffers eternal punishment. In the Hebrew scriptures, fire is both judgment and purification. In Hindu rituals, fire is the mouth of the divine, carrying offerings upward. Everywhere, fire and guilt intertwine. To misuse fire, to disrespect its gift, is to invite shame, punishment, even exile. But why did fire magnify guilt so powerfully? Perhaps because it demanded stewardship. Unlike a spear or a stone, fire was alive. It consumed, breathed, moved. It required care, and to fail that care felt like a moral failing, not just a practical mistake. Fire was trust made visible. A flame handed to you was the group saying, we believe you will guard this for us. To betray that trust was to feel the deep sting of guilt. Fire also changed how humans treated animals. Cooking flesh softened it, made it sweeter, easier to eat. It expanded the diet, allowing marrow and fat to be consumed. But it also made the act of killing more solemn. No longer was flesh torn raw in silence. Now it was roasted, shared, savored. Around the fire, the memory of the animal lingered longer. Its life felt weightier. And with this, guilt began to expand into the realm of taking life itself. Did the first whispers of apology to a slain animal begin in firelight? Did guilt, for the first time, extend beyond humans and into the world of other beings? The relationship between fire and guilt endures even now. We still gather around its glow, candles, hearths, pyres, to confess, to mourn, to atone. We burn incense for the dead, light lamps for the divine, kindle flames to mark remembrance. Fire, for us, is never only physical. It is moral, spiritual, emotional. In prehistory, fire changed the terms of survival. But it also changed the terms of the soul. It taught early humans that power carries weight, that mistakes have consequences, that responsibility is not fleeting but enduring. In the dance of light and shadow, guilt became something more than an instinct. It became a conscience. And so, when fire met conscience, something irreversible occurred. Humanity no longer lived only in the present moment. We began to carry the past, to feel it, to regret it, to learn from it. Guilt became a companion flickering beside the flame, whispering that every choice mattered, that every flame was fragile, and that survival was no longer only about what we could take, but about what we were willing to protect. If guilt had a birthplace, it might have been in the quiet fracture of trust. Not in the violence of claws, not in the roar of predators, but in the silence that follows a broken promise. Because guilt is not only about survival or instinct, it is about relationships. It is about bonds stretched, then torn. And somewhere in the deep past, a human broke a promise, and for the first time, the weight of betrayal settled onto the chest of our species. But what is a promise in a world without words? To us today, a promise is spoken, written, sworn. It is a contract shaped by language. Yet even before structured language, promises lived in gestures, in expectations, in the fragile web of reliance that bound one human to another. A nod, a glance, a piece of food handed with trust, to guard the fire, to watch the child, to return with meat. These were promises long before language carved them into sound. Imagine a small band of hunter-gatherers on the move. They are hungry. The children are weak. The group divides tasks. 2 men will hunt, others will forage, 1 will watch the fire. But one man, feeling hunger twist inside him, hoards more than his share. He eats in secret. He returns with less than he found. And though no words condemn him, perhaps language is still in its infancy, every glance at his empty hands is a judgment. The group knows. The group remembers. And he feels it, a tightness in the chest, a heat in the face. This is guilt born not of instinct, but of broken trust. The broken promise reshaped humanity. For promises created something larger than survival. They created the future. A promise is an agreement about what will be. It binds people not just to the present moment, but to tomorrow. And when that bond breaks, the pain is not only hunger or loss, but betrayal. The group cannot move forward with certainty. The future has been poisoned. And this poison is what guilt teaches us to fear. Anthropologists suggest that promises may have been one of the earliest forms of social glue. Not the promise as we know it, clothed in elaborate language, but simple, silent assurances. I will share with you. I will stay with you. I will not abandon you. These were the foundations of trust, and without trust, a group cannot survive. To betray this was not only selfish, it was dangerous. And so the one who broke the promise felt the sting of guilt not as punishment from others alone, but as a wound inside themselves. Guilt here served its first great purpose. It was the guardian of trust. It reminded early humans that betrayal fractured more than bonds. It fractured survival itself. Those who felt guilt most deeply were those who remained tethered to the group, who repaired the rift, who sought forgiveness. Those who did not feel guilt, or ignored it, found themselves pushed to the margins, distrusted, perhaps abandoned. In this way, guilt shaped evolution. But let us go deeper. What did the first broken promise feel like? It was not simply fear of consequence. Fear belongs to the body, but guilt belongs to the soul. Imagine the man who hoarded food. That night, when the fire burns low and the children cry in hunger, he avoids their eyes. Every flicker of flame reminds him of what he took. Every cough of the sick reminds him of what he withheld. It is not only the group that accuses him. His own mind turns against him. He cannot sleep. He remembers. He regrets. This is the haunting power of guilt. And yet, guilt is not only torment. It is also the seed of repair. For the man who feels guilt may rise the next day with different hands. He may share the best cut of meat. He may tend the fire with care. He may carry a child when its mother grows weary. Guilt drives restitution. It whispers, do better, make it right. And in this way, guilt ensures survival, not by punishing the selfish, but by transforming them. Over time, these moments of broken promises and guilty reparations carved deep grooves into culture. Rituals of apology emerged. Gestures of making amends. The broken promise taught humanity not only that we could fail each other, but that we could choose to heal what was broken. Guilt, in its paradox, became a gift. It was pain, yes, but pain with purpose. The philosophical weight of this moment is staggering. A promise is a bridge across time, linking present to future. To break it is to collapse that bridge, plunging others into uncertainty. And guilt is the echo of that collapse. It reminds us that trust is fragile, that the future is built not on instinct alone, but on choice. Without promises, humans would live only in the now, like other animals. With promises, we became beings of time. With guilt, we became beings who remember when time is broken. Consider too the scale of betrayal. A broken promise is not only about food or fire. It can be about loyalty, about safety, about love. Perhaps one of the deepest wounds in prehistory was abandonment. When someone left the group, left a mate, left a child. To abandon was to break the most sacred promise of all, I will be with you. And here, guilt strikes hardest, for even the one who leaves may feel its pull. Alone in the wild, with no voices, no fire, no companionship, guilt may whisper louder than hunger. It may say, you should have stayed. You should not have left them behind. From these ancient fractures of trust came the foundation of morality. Every law, every code, every system of ethics can trace its roots to this first moment, when one human let another down, and the pain of that failure lingered. Out of that pain, rules were born. Out of those rules, societies grew. But it all begins with the first broken promise, and the guilt that followed. Even today, promises shape our lives. We promise love. We promise fidelity. We promise to care, to protect, to be present. When we break these, we feel guilt not because society tells us to, but because something ancient is awakened. Something that reaches back hundreds of thousands of years, to a firelit circle, to a hungry band of humans, to a moment when one of us failed the others. The story of guilt cannot be told without the story of promises. They are twins, born together in the prehistoric night. One gives us hope for the future. The other guards us against betraying it. Together, they built the foundation of humanity's moral world. And so, the first broken promise was not simply a failure. It was a revelation. It revealed that humans were more than animals scrambling for survival. We were beings capable of trust, of loyalty, of betrayal, and of remorse. We were beings for whom relationships mattered as much as food or shelter. Guilt ensured those relationships endured, even when fractured, by teaching us the cost of breaking them. When that first promise broke, something new was born. A conscience took shape in the heart of humanity. It whispered through the centuries, through every culture and ritual, through every fire and every word, do not betray. If you do, remember. And in remembering, repair. If guilt had a face in prehistory, perhaps it was not carved in the eyes of a hunter or etched into the lines of an elder. Perhaps it was heard in the cry of a child, a cry fading into the dark as small footsteps were left behind. Because one of the most devastating betrayals in the human story was not about food or fire. It was abandonment. It was the moment when a child too weak to keep pace was left by the group. And somewhere in the long silence after that moment, guilt was born, heavy, inescapable, unbearable. Survival was merciless. Hunter-gatherer bands moved as the seasons commanded. When prey grew scarce, when waterholes dried, when the air itself carried the sharp edge of hunger, the group had to move. They could not wait. To stop was to die. And in that cruel reality, children who faltered risked slowing everyone. An elder carrying them meant the elder could not forage or hunt. The group faced the impossible choice: carry the child and risk the many, or leave the child and save the rest. Imagine this scene. A band crossing the dry savanna. Heat presses down. Their feet crack the earth. The youngest stumbles, a small body trembling with fever, perhaps injured from a fall. The mother pleads. Her voice shakes. The group hesitates. Every second they stand still drains energy, burns daylight, risks predators. They look to the horizon, then back to the child. The choice is unthinkable, but it must be made. Slowly, with eyes cast downward, they walk on. The child's cry follows them, softer, then distant, then gone. Here, guilt first takes on its deepest wound. Because this decision is not theft, not rivalry, not even a broken promise. It is survival weighed against love. And though the group walks forward, something inside them stays behind. In the firelight that night, the mother's silence burns louder than any scream. Others shift uneasily. Some look at the flames, others at the ground. They hear not the child's cry, but the echo of their own steps walking away. This is guilt in its purest form, not for what we did to ourselves, but for what we allowed to happen to another. Anthropologists debate whether such decisions were common or rare. Some argue that prehistoric groups were fiercely protective of children because every child meant the future of the lineage. Others point out that when survival was on the edge, hard sacrifices had to be made. What is clear is that abandonment of the young would have left deep scars. And those scars are visible not only in bones or burial sites, but in the psychology of guilt itself. For even today, guilt is strongest when it concerns children. To fail a child feels like the heaviest of failures. It awakens something ancient in us, a memory older than language, when leaving a child behind meant betraying both the present and the future. And perhaps somewhere in our evolutionary journey, guilt was shaped most powerfully by this pain. But guilt here is not only torment. It is transformation. Because the pain of abandoning a child would haunt the group, and that haunting taught them to resist such choices. In time, humans became creatures who carried their young even when it hurt, who protected them even when it cost, who would risk the group's strength for the smallest life. Guilt bent us toward compassion, not perfection, but enough to shift the balance toward care. Archaeology offers us glimpses. Burials of children tenderly placed in the earth with shells or ochre beside them. These are not the traces of abandonment. These are traces of love, of grief, of guilt transmuted into ritual. If children were once left behind, humanity also learned to stop, to mourn, to remember. And memory itself is shaped by guilt, the need to mark that a life mattered, even if it was lost too soon. Let us imagine the inner world of a mother whose child was left behind. That night, as she sits by the fire, her arms ache with absence. Every rustle of grass makes her look, half expecting the child to return. Her body carries milk but no infant to feed. Her mind replays the moment again and again, her pleas, the silence of the others, the look on her child's face. This replay is the machinery of guilt. It does not allow forgetting. It insists on remembering, on rehearsing what could have been different. And here we see guilt as more than punishment. It becomes a lesson across generations. Because the mother's grief, the group's discomfort, the whispers of regret, all of these shape behavior. The next time the band faces such a choice, perhaps they carry the child longer. Perhaps they fashion a sling from animal hide, or they share the burden across shoulders. Guilt fuels innovation. Guilt teaches us not to repeat the fracture. The philosophical dimension of this is profound. Abandoning a child strikes at the core of what it means to be human. For what are we, if not the protectors of our young. To feel guilt here is to feel the tug of the future itself. The child is not only a body, but a possibility. And when that possibility is cut short, guilt is the echo of unrealized futures. It is the mind mourning not only what was, but what could have been. And yet, guilt also creates bonds. For the group that once left a child behind may become the group that never forgets. Stories may emerge, told in whispers, "We left him, and we should not have." Never again. Such stories harden into moral codes. Moral codes become traditions. Traditions become culture. In this way, the guilt of a single lost child may ripple outward until it reshapes the entire way a people lives. Even today, myths and legends carry echoes of this pain. Tales of abandoned children, from Moses in the reeds to Romulus and Remus by the river, haunt human imagination. These stories endure because they touch something deep, something prehistoric. They are not simply tales of survival. They are memory's way of holding on to guilt, retelling it so that we may learn again and again, do not abandon the child. The child left behind is, in many ways, the first moral test of humanity. It asks us, are we creatures of instinct, driven only by survival? Or are we beings who will sacrifice, who will suffer, who will carry burdens not because they help us now, but because they matter for tomorrow? Guilt is the whisper that insists on the second answer. It does not allow us the comfort of instinct alone. It forces us into the painful, beautiful complexity of morality. And perhaps this is why, across time, humans became known not only as hunters, gatherers, makers of fire, but as nurturers. As beings who cradle the fragile, who carry the weak, who stay behind so that no one is left in silence. Guilt, though cruel in the moment of loss, bent us toward this destiny. It was the sharp stone that carved compassion into the heart of humanity. So when we speak of the first time a human felt guilt, perhaps we should not look only at stolen food or broken promises. Perhaps we should listen instead for a child's cry fading into distance, and the silence that followed. Because in that silence, guilt was not only born, it became eternal. It became the voice that told us again and again, through firelight and story, through ritual and myth, never leave the child behind. If you do, remember. And in remembering, become better. There is something sacred in the glow of fire. Long before temples and councils, humans gathered around flames to share more than warmth, they shared themselves. And in that intimate circle, guilt found a voice. Firelight confessions were the first stage for conscience to speak, for humans to reveal what weighed upon them, for the invisible burdens of memory and responsibility to be seen and felt. Picture a small band huddled near a flickering flame, night pressing in from all sides. The hunt is over, the cold bites at bare skin, the earth smells of ash and sweat. In this vulnerable space, the unspoken stories of the day emerge. A hunter admits his failure to catch prey. A mother whispers regret for leaving the child behind, even briefly. A youth confesses hiding food from the group. These are not mere recountings of action, they are acknowledgments of moral failure, the first human attempts to unburden the conscience. Firelight makes guilt tangible. The flames reflect in eyes wide with fear and shame, in faces flushed with self-reproach. Shadows dance across the rocks, mirroring inner turmoil. The fire illuminates the interior landscape of the mind, revealing fear, regret, and the desire for redemption. Here, guilt is no longer private, it becomes a communal experience. By speaking it aloud, by confessing, the individual's remorse is witnessed, acknowledged, and shared. This is the origin of moral accountability. In many ways, the fire functions as a mediator. It listens, it transforms, it contains. The crackle of flames absorbs the confession and returns it as warmth, as understanding, as shared experience. To confess in firelight is to place one's burden into a space larger than oneself, allowing the group to hold it collectively. This act strengthens bonds, builds trust, and ensures that guilt does not isolate the individual but instead connects them more deeply to the group. Consider the first spoken apologies. Perhaps a young hunter, newly initiated into adulthood, admits to taking more than his share of meat. His voice trembles. The elder nods, perhaps murmuring forgiveness. The shame remains, but now it is tempered by acknowledgement and communal recognition. In this way, firelight confessions teach something critical. Guilt is not only punishment, it is instruction, a guide to repair, to learning, to being better. Firelight also amplifies memory. The flicker and warmth create a sacred stage upon which events can be replayed vividly. The hunter sees the missed throw, the fallen prey, the disappointment of companions. The mother relives the moment she turned from the crying child. The youth remembers the food hidden beneath leaves. Memory and emotion combine in this ritual, making guilt more than fleeting unease. It becomes a profound shaping force. Anthropologists suggest that these confessions around fire may have been among the first forms of social governance. Rules did not need to be written or enforced by violence when conscience could be cultivated through shared acknowledgement of failure. Firelight confession teaches the young, reminds the old, and perpetuates a culture where guilt regulates behavior without the constant need for coercion. The act of confessing also transforms guilt from a destructive force into a constructive one. Without expression, guilt festers into shame, into resentment, into paralysis. With expression, it becomes lesson, guide, and motivation. The human who confesses is simultaneously acknowledging error and committing to change. In this way, the firelight acts as a crucible, purifying the raw, painful emotion into something meaningful, something usable, something that strengthens both individual and group. Firelight confessions also nurture empathy. When one human admits a moral failing, the others witness it, and their own understanding deepens. They recognize the fragility and complexity of being human. They learn to forgive, to share responsibility, to consider the consequences of their own actions more carefully. Guilt, once private and isolating, is transformed into a social tool for mutual growth and cohesion. Even the physicality of fire enhances this process. Heat draws people close, creating intimacy and vulnerability. Flickering light and shadow strip away pretense. The sound of crackling embers breaks silence with a rhythm that encourages attention and reflection. The fire becomes a silent participant in confession, a witness that holds the weight of collective conscience. The psychological impact of these early rituals cannot be overstated. Humans are unique in the degree to which we internalize moral responsibility. Firelight confession is perhaps the first environment designed to allow that internalization to surface safely, to be examined and shared. It is a rehearsal for conscience itself, a stage for guilt to speak, to guide, and ultimately to teach. Stories likely emerged from these confessions. Tales of mistakes, of failed hunts, of acts of omission or commission, passed down from one night to the next. These stories preserved lessons beyond the immediate group, creating culture and tradition. Each narrative was a cautionary tale, a moral thread woven into the fabric of early human society. Guilt, by being acknowledged in the firelight, became immortalized in collective memory. Firelight confessions also allowed humans to process grief, to admit the pain of a lost child, to speak the sorrow of a failed hunt, to express the remorse of a betrayal. These acts were not only emotional release but ritual acts of reconciliation with fate. Through these confessions, guilt becomes a bridge connecting the living, the dead, and the unborn, teaching humans to carry the past responsibly without being crushed by it. And so, the circle around the fire becomes sacred. The flames symbolize not just survival, but reflection, conscience, and morality. The act of confession in this space transforms guilt from a private torment into a shared, instructive, and even redemptive experience. It is the first stage of moral society, where responsibility, memory, and emotion converge. Perhaps the most profound lesson of firelight confessions is this: guilt is not merely an obstacle to be endured. It is a teacher, a mirror, a thread that binds individuals to each other and to the larger arc of human existence. Through confession, humans learn that being aware of failure is not weakness, but the beginning of wisdom. Firelight allows us to see our failures, our regrets, and our responsibilities clearly, and in doing so, it shapes the very essence of humanity. By the flickering glow of the first fires, humans began to understand themselves as moral beings. They learned to speak, to admit, to feel, and to connect. They discovered that guilt, once expressed, could lead to forgiveness, to restitution, to empathy, and to deeper bonds. It was no longer simply the fear of survival or instinctive regret, it had become the foundation of conscience. In the firelight, guilt was not a punishment. It was illumination. It revealed the contours of moral choice, the shape of responsibility, the weight of connection. It was both the shadow and the light, showing what was wrong and pointing toward what could be made right. And so, the tradition of confession begins here, around the first flickering flames. Long before laws, before formalized ethics, before scribes or priests, humans learned to gather, to speak, and to reckon with themselves. In this circle, guilt becomes not a curse, but a guide, leading early humans from instinct to introspection, from survival to moral awareness. Firelight confession was the crucible in which humanity's conscience was forged. It taught that guilt was not a burden to hide, but a force to understand, to shape, and to act upon. And it was here, in this small circle of light and shadow, that the first humans began to feel the profound responsibility of being human, of being aware of wrong, of feeling it, and of striving always to make it right. Hunting was the heartbeat of prehistoric life. It provided food, warmth, and survival itself. Yet beyond the physical necessity, hunting carried moral weight. Every strike, every kill, every missed opportunity created ripples that stretched far beyond the immediate act. And in these ripples, guilt first cast its shadows, teaching early humans that survival was not merely about skill or strength, but about conscience, responsibility, and foresight. Imagine a hunt on a vast grassland. The sun is low, painting the sky in molten oranges and deep purples. The group moves quietly, breath shallow, feet careful. They track a herd of antelope, their movements deliberate, synchronized. Each hunter knows the risk. A misstep could mean injury, death, or lost prey. And yet, beyond fear, beyond hunger, there is awareness. They know that every action affects the others, that every failure carries consequences that extend beyond themselves. This awareness is the soil in which guilt takes root. The first shadow of guilt appears not in the successful hunter, but in the one who fails. Perhaps a young man misses his mark or startles the herd too soon and the prey flees. The group's feast is diminished. Hunger gnaws. Frustration simmers. The hunter feels it, a tightening in the chest, a whisper of unease. This is guilt as a survival compass, pointing to errors that endanger not only oneself but the collective. It is instinct sharpened by social awareness. But hunting also introduced another form of guilt, one more subtle, yet profound. To take life is to confront mortality, not only of oneself, but of another being. Even before humans developed complex language, they likely recognized the weight of taking an animal's life. The act of killing was both necessary and morally charged. And as fire and cooking entered human life, this awareness deepened. Flesh was no longer consumed raw, it was shared, celebrated, and remembered. The life taken became visible in memory and ritual. Guilt, in this context, became an ethical teacher, shaping attitudes toward life and death. Consider the preparation of a kill. The hunters must decide who strikes, who restrains, who retrieves. Every choice carries consequence. If one hunter acts impulsively, if another hesitates, the prey escapes or suffers unnecessarily. These moments of judgment create immediate feedback, the echo of failure, the pang of responsibility. Guilt emerges not as punishment, but as insight, a guide for future behavior, a signal that precision, patience, and care matter. Shadows of the hunt extend into communal life. When a kill is shared, there is the possibility of fairness or inequity. Who receives meat first? Who gets the marrow? Who is left with scraps? Decisions here affect cohesion, trust, and morale. And when the distribution is unfair or selfish, guilt appears, sharpening the memory of error. It reinforces social norms, teaching humans to balance personal need with collective survival. Guilt becomes intertwined with ethics long before written law. The psychological dimension of hunting also matters. Early humans could not escape the memory of those left behind in danger, of companions injured or lost. Perhaps a child wandered too far while others hunted. Perhaps an elder tripped near a predator. Each incident imprinted lessons about vigilance, care, and responsibility. Guilt serves as a mental mirror, reflecting failures that could be fatal. It ensures that lessons endure, that mistakes are neither forgotten nor repeated. Anthropologists note that rituals around hunting often involve acknowledgement of guilt. Some hunter-gatherer cultures speak to the animal spirit, offer parts of the kill back to the earth, or mark the hunt with ceremonial acts. These are not merely superstition. They are the first codified responses to moral discomfort. Guilt recognized and ritualized becomes a stabilizing force. It transforms potential trauma into structure, experience into culture. Shadows of the hunt also reveal a deeper philosophical dimension. Humans are unique in that we can foresee consequences, anticipate outcomes, and weigh decisions morally. The hunter knows that his aim, his timing, his presence affects others. The prey's death is not a simple event. It resonates with the group, with the child watching, with the elder depending on sustenance. In this way, guilt arises as the human mind confronts the interconnectedness of life. Every action matters, and every lapse echoes beyond the moment. Guilt during the hunt is both individual and communal. It motivates skill development, careful planning, and cooperation. It teaches patience, empathy, and foresight. A hunter who ignores these lessons risks not only his own survival but the group's. Over time, these repeated experiences shape not only behavior but character. Guilt, in this context, is the invisible instructor teaching early humans how to navigate complex social and ecological environments. Consider also the moments after the hunt. The meat is cooked, shared, and celebrated. Around the fire, stories are told: who succeeded, who failed, what dangers were faced. Confessions emerge: I missed the strike, or I startled the herd too early. Here, guilt is processed, integrated, and transformed. The firelight confession merges with the memory of the hunt, creating a communal understanding of responsibility, skill, and morality. Even the shadows of the hunt carry symbolic weight. The flickering light across rocks, the stretching forms of humans and animals, mirror the internal shadows cast by guilt. These shadows are not illusions. They are representations of the mind grappling with action and consequence. Early humans could see themselves reflected in the act of hunting, and in that reflection, recognize moral responsibility. Guilt becomes both teacher and mirror, shaping not only behavior but identity. In essence, hunting is more than a means of survival. It is the crucible in which morality, conscience, and human awareness are forged. The shadows of the hunt are the first lessons in empathy, foresight, and accountability. They demonstrate that survival is not merely a matter of strength or cunning, but of conscience, attention, and care. Guilt, arising naturally in this context, ensures that these lessons are learned, remembered, and passed on. Even today, hunting resonates with these ancient dynamics. Hunters report respect for prey, acknowledgement of responsibility, and reflection on mortality. These modern echoes remind us that the psychological and moral frameworks developed in prehistory persist. Guilt, nurtured by necessity and social cohesion, remains a central element of human consciousness. And so, in the vast landscapes of prehistory, every hunt carried more than the chance of sustenance. Every hunt was a moral experiment, a lesson in empathy and responsibility. Guilt, subtle and persistent, shaped behavior, reinforced trust, and taught humans to navigate the delicate balance between survival and conscience. It illuminated the path from mere existence to moral awareness, from instinct to foresight, from shadow to reflection. The shadows of the hunt remind us that being human is not merely about survival. It is about recognizing the weight of our actions, understanding the consequences of our choices, and feeling the responsibility that connects us to others. Guilt emerges not as punishment, but as guidance, an invisible companion that ensures we do not forget the impact of our decisions. In the dance of predator and prey, in the silent anticipation of the grasslands, humans learned their first lessons in conscience. The shadows of the hunt became shadows of the mind, teaching responsibility, empathy, and the moral weight of life itself. Guilt born here was not a burden to carry alone, but a force that tethered humans together, ensuring that the species could survive, not just physically, but morally, socially, and emotionally. Words are a bridge. They carry thought across space, across time, across minds. And for humans, the first words of regret were not spoken lightly. They were born from the collision of action and conscience, of memory and consequence, of instinct and reflection. Somewhere in prehistory, a human spoke what had previously only been felt, and in that utterance, guilt found voice. Imagine a cave illuminated by firelight. The walls are rough, etched with shadows of the day. Around the fire, the group rests after a long hunt or a harsh journey. The air is thick with the scent of smoke and cooked meat. In this moment of pause, a human lifts a voice, perhaps a low, trembling murmur, should not have. The sentence halts, incomplete, yet its meaning is clear. A moral reckoning has begun, articulated for the first time. Before words, regret existed only in the heart. It was silent, internal, experienced as tension, unease, or sorrow. But language transforms that internal state into shared understanding. When one speaks regret aloud, others can hear, recognize, and respond. The isolation of guilt becomes communal. The human who admits failure finds acknowledgement, and perhaps forgiveness, from peers. The first words of regret are not merely confessions, they are invitations to connection, to moral dialogue. Consider a hunter who missed the strike, allowing prey to escape. Previously, guilt would be felt privately, a tightening of the chest, a restless mind. But now, with words, he can express it. I misjudged. I failed. These words allow others to grasp the failure, to understand the stakes, to witness the remorse. This transforms guilt from a personal burden into a shared moral reality, creating social cohesion and reinforcing the standards of the group. The first words of regret were fragile. They emerged from fear, from the trembling understanding of consequence. Yet they carried immense power. Spoken aloud, they validate the moral compass of the speaker and recognize the moral expectations of the group. The utterance itself is an act of repair. It acknowledges harm, admits responsibility, and opens the door to restitution. Guilt is no longer inert, it becomes action-oriented, a guide for ethical behavior. Anthropologists suggest that language and guilt evolve together. The ability to communicate regret requires not only memory of action but foresight, empathy, and social awareness. A human must recognize the impact of their deed, imagine the consequences, and convey it in a way others can comprehend. This complex cognitive interplay marks the emergence of a moral self, a being aware of responsibility, choice, and the effects of one's actions on others. Imagine the sound of that first word, a breath, a murmur, a syllable drawn from experience and feeling. It carries weight beyond the simple phonetic pattern. It resonates with the listener, evokes emotion, and shapes behavior. The group hears not only the failure, but the recognition of it, the moral acknowledgement that something should have been done differently. This is the moment when guilt moves from instinct to culture, from private emotion to communal norm. These first words of regret also catalyze memory. Spoken aloud, the incident is recorded in the minds of others. The memory is strengthened, the lesson reinforced. The hunter remembers the miss. The mother remembers the moment of neglect. The group remembers the betrayal. Language allows the human conscience to extend beyond the individual, embedding moral lessons into collective consciousness. This is how ethical awareness spreads, how guilt ensures learning, and how human culture is shaped by the spoken word. Words of regret also create empathy. Hearing another articulate remorse awakens understanding, compassion, and recognition in the listener. The group may respond with consolation, guidance, or forgiveness. This exchange strengthens bonds, nurtures cooperation, and teaches the human mind to value not only survival, but ethical consideration. Guilt, expressed through language, becomes both teacher and social glue, ensuring that the species does not merely endure, but endures with conscience. The philosophical implications are profound. Regret, spoken aloud, signals awareness of choice and consequence. It indicates the ability to foresee outcomes and to feel moral responsibility. The first words of regret mark the evolution of humans from reactive beings, governed solely by instinct, to reflective beings capable of moral reasoning. Guilt becomes an internal compass articulated externally, guiding behavior across space and time. Even small words of apology, "I should not have," shape community life. They reinforce accountability, signal awareness, and set precedents for future behavior. Over generations, these utterances evolve into complex moral codes, rituals of atonement, and ethical traditions. Language transforms the raw emotion of guilt into structured social norms, ensuring that conscience is passed from one generation to the next. Imagine the ripple effect. One expression of regret inspires others. "I too failed," another may murmur. Shared remorse creates a collective moral consciousness. The group becomes aware of standards, expectations, and responsibilities. Guilt, once an isolated emotion, now becomes a tool for social cohesion, moral education, and cultural continuity. The first words of regret plant the seeds for human morality, justice, and ethical awareness. Firelight amplifies this process. Shadows dance across cave walls as voices tremble and rise. The flickering glow creates intimacy and vulnerability, encouraging honesty and reflection. Words of regret spoken in this context are witnessed, validated, and remembered. The fire becomes both a stage and a participant, shaping how guilt is expressed, acknowledged, and transformed. The first words of regret also establish precedent. They signal that humans are accountable not only to themselves, but to others. Ethical awareness emerges from this accountability. Mistakes are no longer private, they are recognized socially. And with recognition comes the opportunity for repair, restitution, and learning. Guilt, when articulated, becomes actionable. It moves from emotion to expression, from reflection to behavior, from instinct to morality. Even today, the echoes of those first words remain. Apologies, confessions, admissions of wrongdoing, all trace back to this prehistoric moment when language gave voice to conscience. Humans continue to speak, write, and ritualize regret, linking us to the minds of our ancestors. The moral frameworks we live by, the laws and ethics we uphold, are the descendants of that first murmur of acknowledgement, that first recognition of error. In essence, the first words of regret mark a turning point in the human journey. They show that guilt is not a curse to bear silently, but a force to articulate, understand, and integrate into social life. Language transforms guilt from raw emotion into shared moral knowledge, from internal torment into communal guidance. These words make humans not only aware of failure, but aware of the responsibility to respond, repair, and evolve. And so, in that fire-lit cave, when the first syllables of remorse were spoken, the human conscience was irrevocably changed. Guilt became a teacher. Memory became a guide. The group became a community. Responsibility became tangible. Morality began. From the first words of regret, humanity learned to carry not only food and fire, but conscience, empathy, and the enduring awareness that our actions echo far beyond ourselves. Guilt is never truly alone. Even in the deepest silence, even in the absence of confession, someone is always watching, a companion, a group member, a child, the environment itself. In prehistory, the first silent witnesses were not merely passive observers, they were active participants in the moral development of humans. Their presence ensured that guilt carried weight, that actions mattered, and that accountability existed even before words were spoken. Imagine a band moving through dense forest. A hunter takes more than his share of food, slipping away from the group under cover of foliage. No one speaks. No one confronts him immediately. Yet every step he takes is shadowed by eyes, the silent witness of his companions. These observers do not merely see the act, they record it, remember it, and influence future interactions. Their very presence shapes behavior. Guilt is amplified, mirrored, and internalized because someone, somewhere, has seen, noted, and carried the truth. The silent witness is also the environment. Prehistoric humans lived in landscapes that observed their every movement. Tracks in sand, broken branches, the bones of animals, all bore testimony to human action. The world itself recorded misdeeds, failures, and successes. A forgotten fire, a missed kill, a neglected child, the traces remained. Guilt, in this sense, is not only social but ecological. Humans learned that the consequences of their actions extend beyond immediate perception, leaving marks that could be discovered, remembered, and judged later. The silent witness also includes the memory of the self. Every action is remembered internally, replayed in the mind, scrutinized, and measured against internal moral standards. This self-observation is the first step toward conscience. Guilt emerges not only from external judgment but from internal recognition of error. The silent witness, then, is both other and self, the group, the individual, the environment, all coalescing to ensure accountability. Consider a moment of failure. A hunter loses his spear, letting prey escape. No one yells. No one points blame. Yet the other hunters watch. The hunter sees their eyes, their subtle shifts, their looks of disappointment or concern. That observation triggers the mind to assess, to feel, to remember. Guilt is experienced not as immediate punishment but as awareness of relational consequence. The silent witness shapes conscience by simply existing, by providing a mirror for human behavior. Anthropologists propose that the concept of the silent witness was crucial to the evolution of morality. Social cohesion relies on the perception that actions matter even when no immediate enforcement occurs. By acknowledging that others are watching, and that memory retains actions, humans internalize moral standards. Guilt becomes a self-regulating force, guided by awareness of observers and anticipation of future consequences. The silent witness also allows for the emergence of narrative. Early humans may have shared stories not just of heroic hunts but of failures, betrayals, and mistakes. The audience, even if silent, serves as a witness to lessons embedded in these narratives. Guilt is not erased, it is remembered, amplified, and transformed into guidance for the group. The silent witness ensures that errors are not isolated incidents but teachable moments embedded in collective consciousness. This witness effect extends to children. Observing adults, children learn the consequences of action, the weight of choice, and the meaning of responsibility. A child sees a hunter hesitate, a mother mourn, a companion confess. Even without explanation, the child internalizes these observations. Guilt is transmitted across generations silently, through observation, imitation, and reflection. The silent witness thus ensures continuity of moral awareness long before formal teaching or structured language exists. The environment, too, plays a role as witness. Tracks left in mud, crushed grass, or broken branches serve as reminders of actions. The world remembers when humans forget. Predators, drought, or scarcity may reveal the cost of mistakes. In this sense, guilt is not a social construct alone but an ecological one. Early humans learned that every act resonates beyond immediate perception, that the world itself watches, and that survival and conscience are intertwined. The silent witness also nurtures reflection. When alone, humans replay observed events, reconstruct moral failures, and assess personal responsibility. The absence of others does not diminish guilt, it magnifies it through memory. Solitude becomes a space for conscience, introspection, and moral rehearsal. By imagining the gaze of the silent witness, humans cultivate foresight, empathy, and ethical reasoning. Consider a mother who leaves her child for a moment to gather firewood. She glances back, sees no danger, yet in her mind the memory of risk lingers. She imagines the child's vulnerability, the consequences if something were to happen. That imagined witness, the child unseen but present, guides her choices, invoking guilt as a mechanism for careful action. In this way, the silent witness is both real and conceptual, external and internal, shaping morality through observation and anticipation. Even the dead can serve as silent witnesses. Burial sites, ancestral remains, and sacred places hold memory and expectation. Actions taken today are measured against the legacy of those who came before. Guilt becomes a temporal bridge linking past and present. Humans learn to act responsibly not only for survival but for honor, continuity, and respect. The silent witness encompasses time as well as space. Philosophically, the silent witness demonstrates that guilt is relational, even in solitude. It reveals that conscience is not merely personal but emerges from connection, to others, to the environment, and to the past. Awareness of observation, memory, and consequence transforms instinct into reflection. Humans begin to act not solely out of immediate need but from understanding the ripple effects of action. Guilt, amplified by the silent witness, becomes the guiding force of morality. The silent witness also teaches humility. Even when no one speaks, humans feel accountable. This awareness tempers arrogance, fosters empathy, and nurtures cooperation. Early humans learned that being observed, remembered, or imagined by others constrains behavior in beneficial ways. Guilt becomes not a burden but a tool for ethical development, ensuring that the species evolves socially as well as physically. In essence, the silent witness is everywhere. It is the companion, the group, the child, the memory, the landscape, and the past. It watches, records, and holds humans accountable. Guilt emerges in its presence, shaping behavior, conscience, and culture. By learning that someone, or something, is always watching, humans internalize moral responsibility, transform regret into action, and create the foundations of ethical society. Even today, the echoes of the silent witness persist. Humans remain aware of observation, from peers, society, and history itself. Memory, reputation, and legacy continue to shape moral choices. The silent witness ensures that guilt is not fleeting, that accountability persists, and that conscience is cultivated across time and space. And so, in the quiet moments of prehistory, when eyes were watching, tracks were following, and memory recorded every act, guilt learned its first teacher. The silent witness illuminated responsibility, enforced ethical awareness, and forged the relational conscience that defines humanity. It ensured that actions mattered, that choices carried weight, and that the human mind would grow aware of morality even before words or confession existed. In the presence of the silent witness, humans discovered the profound lesson of accountability, that every act is observed, remembered, and carries consequence. Guilt, in turn, becomes a tool for reflection, growth, and social cohesion. It is not punishment alone but instruction, shaping humans into beings who act with foresight, empathy, and ethical awareness. Blood is the most primal marker of life. It stains hands, soil, and memory, binding humans to both survival and conscience. In prehistory, the first experience of guilt tied to blood was not abstract, it was immediate, visceral, and inescapable. The act of taking life, whether animal or human, imprinted upon the mind a weight that could not be carried lightly. Here, guilt becomes physical, emotional, and moral all at once. Imagine a hunt where the spear pierces the hide of a great beast. The hunter feels the tremor of life beneath his hand, the spray of blood that binds him to responsibility. It is not merely the success of the hunt that he carries forward but the awareness of taking life, of changing the course of existence. The blood stains, but it also speaks, it reminds, warns, and teaches. Guilt is intertwined with this physical reality, merging instinct, observation, and conscience. Blood is also the signal of failure. A misjudged strike, a botched kill, or unnecessary suffering awakens the mind to error. The hunter observes the suffering of the animal, senses the disappointment of companions, and experiences the first stirrings of remorse. This early guilt is immediate, unavoidable, and transformative. It is a force that compels reflection, adjustment, and eventually ethical consideration. The weight of blood extends beyond hunting. Intragroup conflict, accidental harm, or unintentional injury to kin would evoke the same moral tension. To see another human injured by one's hand, however unintentional, generates profound guilt. Early humans experienced this as a physical and emotional sensation, heart racing, stomach twisting, mind replaying the moment. Blood becomes both evidence and teacher, shaping morality through the immediacy of consequence. Consider ritualized practices surrounding blood. Even without written language, humans developed ceremonies to mark life taken. They offered prayers, gestures, or symbolic acts of restitution. These responses indicate an understanding that guilt was not simply emotional but ethical. Blood required acknowledgement. Failing to honor the life taken, whether human or animal, would leave a lingering moral debt. Guilt therefore guides not only behavior but also cultural expression. Anthropologists observe that early humans may have developed symbolic thinking through blood-related experiences, seeing red liquid as more than sustenance or injury, recognizing it as a sign of life lost, and feeling remorse for causing it demonstrates advanced cognition. Blood ties together the physical, emotional, and social domains. The weight of blood becomes a framework in which guilt is both embodied and intellectual, teaching early humans to navigate moral landscapes. The communal dimension of blood-related guilt is profound. Witnessing a kill, an accident, or injury within the group generates shared responsibility. Observers record events in memory, respond with emotion, and participate in the moral reckoning. Guilt spreads beyond the individual, fostering empathy, cooperation, and caution. The human species, reliant on group cohesion for survival, internalized these lessons. Blood, in this sense, is a teacher not only of consequence but of social responsibility. Even accidental shedding of blood could have lasting impact. A child tripping over a sharp rock, a misfired spear, a struggle that results in minor injury, each act imprints upon memory. The witness, whether individual or collective, ensures accountability. Humans learn to feel responsibility even for unintended harm, to carry awareness of action beyond immediate cause and effect. Guilt, in these moments, becomes a scaffold for moral consciousness. Fire amplifies the significance of blood. Around flames, the vivid red of life stands in stark contrast to shadows and darkness. Hunters and observers can see clearly, reflect deeply, and process their actions. Discussions, confessions, and silent acknowledgments all center around this primal symbol. Blood is both literal and metaphorical, marking the intersection of life, death, morality, and conscience. The weight of blood is intertwined with empathy. Witnessing the pain caused by one's hand evokes recognition of suffering. Early humans could feel both their own guilt and the suffering of others. This dual awareness fosters moral development, guiding behavior and shaping the capacity for care, restraint, and responsibility. Guilt becomes a bridge between individual experience and social harmony. The philosophical dimension of blood-related guilt is striking. To take life, to see life lost, to feel the consequences ripple outward, these experiences teach awareness of interconnectedness. Humans discover that actions matter beyond self-interest, that the lives of others carry weight, and that conscience arises from recognition of these realities. The weight of blood embeds morality into survival, forging ethical awareness from the raw materials of life and loss. Even the smallest gestures of restitution carry profound meaning. Covering a slain animal with leaves, placing stones in a burial, murmuring apologies, these acts demonstrate acknowledgement of guilt and responsibility. Humans begin to formalize responses to transgression, ritualizing awareness, and teaching the next generation to respect life. Blood, once simply a physical substance, becomes a moral teacher, embedding lessons of conscience into culture. The psychological impact is enduring. The memory of bloodshed, intentional or accidental, shapes behavior long after the event. Hunters adjust aim, mothers handle children more cautiously, groups refine cooperation. Guilt ensures learning, guiding choices with subtle but persistent influence. Early humans could not unsee blood, nor unfeel the weight it imposed. It became a permanent imprint upon mind, culture, and conscience. Blood also marks transitions. Coming-of-age rituals, initiation into hunting, or exposure to violence demonstrate the first structured encounters with guilt. Adolescents learn responsibility, respect, and moral vigilance through direct engagement with life, death, and consequence. The weight of blood ensures these lessons are not theoretical but immediate, embodied, and memorable. Even today, the symbolic power of blood persists. Across cultures, it signifies life, sacrifice, responsibility, and guilt. The human response to blood reflects evolutionary memory, a deep-rooted understanding of its ethical weight. Early humans' experiences with blood shaped the moral architecture of humanity itself. Guilt, inseparable from life taken, guided survival not only in the physical sense but in the social and ethical. The weight of blood teaches humans to act with awareness. It reminds us that life is fragile, that choices carry consequences, and that responsibility extends beyond immediate perception. Guilt, intertwined with the visceral reality of blood, ensures that the species does not merely endure but evolves, in conscience, empathy, and social cohesion. And so, in prehistory, when blood was first spilled, whether in hunt, conflict, or accident, humans learned the cost of action. They discovered that life taken carries weight, that memory preserves the consequences, and that conscience arises from recognition of responsibility. The weight of blood became the foundation of moral awareness, a primal force shaping behavior, culture, and the human heart. Trust is the fragile thread that holds human groups together. In prehistory, survival depended on cooperation, on shared labor, on the belief that one's companions would act in good faith. To betray that trust was to shatter the very foundation of existence. And when betrayal first appeared, it must have echoed like thunder through the hearts of early humans, awakening a form of guilt that cut deeper than any wound. Imagine a small group of hunters setting out together. Each one relies on the other for safety, for food, for survival itself. A single act of selfishness, a hoarded portion of meat, a secreted flint tool, or a refusal to warn of danger, could place lives at risk. When discovered, such acts would not be dismissed as mere mistakes. They were betrayals, fractures in the invisible fabric binding the group. The guilty individual would feel the gaze of companions, the sting of exclusion, and the weight of shame. The echoes of betrayal did not fade quickly. They lingered in memory, reshaping bonds, teaching lessons about loyalty, morality, and conscience. Betrayal awakens guilt in a unique way. Unlike the accidental spilling of blood, betrayal requires intention. It is a choice, conscious or unconscious, to place the self above the group. And when the choice is revealed, the betrayer feels the crushing realization of what has been lost: trust, belonging, and honor. Guilt becomes not only emotional but existential, threatening the very place of the individual within the community. Consider the emotional texture of such moments. A hunter who withholds food may watch as children go hungry. A sentry who sleeps through danger may hear the cries of the injured. A gatherer who conceals berries rather than share them may see the withered faces of the starving. The betrayer cannot escape the evidence of harm. Guilt becomes inescapable, magnified by the visible suffering of others. The echoes reverberate, replaying each choice, each consequence, until the mind is consumed by remorse. Yet betrayal was not always catastrophic. Sometimes it was subtle: a glance withheld, a duty avoided, a preference for personal comfort over communal need. These small betrayals too left their mark. The group noticed patterns, remembered lapses, and held the individual accountable in ways both overt and quiet. Guilt grew in these spaces, shaping behavior through an awareness of judgment, a fear of exclusion, and a longing for forgiveness. The echoes of betrayal also extended beyond the guilty individual. For those betrayed, the experience left scars of suspicion and pain. Trust once broken was slow to heal. Communities carried these memories, retelling stories of selfishness and cautioning the next generation. Guilt thus intertwined with collective memory, ensuring that lessons of loyalty and betrayal were never forgotten. The group as much as the individual bore the echoes, weaving them into the fabric of culture. Anthropologists suggest that betrayal and guilt may have played crucial roles in shaping human cooperation. Groups that punished betrayal and reinforced guilt ensured greater cohesion and survival. Those who ignored it fractured and fell apart. Guilt then is not merely personal but adaptive, a mechanism ensuring loyalty, fairness, and justice. Betrayal became a warning, guilt a safeguard, and together they reinforce the fragile balance of human life. The experience of betrayal is also deeply philosophical. To betray another is to deny their trust, to violate the invisible agreement of community. To feel guilt for betrayal is to recognize the sacredness of that trust, to see in the suffering of others the reflection of one's own failing. Guilt transforms betrayal from mere strategy into a moral event, embedding conscience into social existence. In prehistory, betrayal could mean exile. A group could not tolerate repeated selfishness, for it threatened survival. Exclusion from the camp, abandonment in the wild, or silent rejection were ultimate punishments. For the betrayer, exile was more terrifying than death. Guilt therefore was sharpened by the knowledge that betrayal endangered not only the group but oneself. It became a force powerful enough to deter selfishness, guiding behavior even when temptation arose. And yet humans are not perfect. Betrayal still occurred. Food was hidden. Secrets were kept. Trust was broken. What mattered most was how guilt transformed these acts into lessons. Some individuals, crushed by the weight of guilt, sought forgiveness, offering restitution, sharing more generously, or submitting to ritual acknowledgement of wrongdoing. Others, unable to bear the shame, withdrew or denied their actions. The echoes of betrayal were thus not uniform. They revealed character, tested resilience, and shaped culture. The rituals of forgiveness became as important as the recognition of betrayal itself. A symbolic gesture, placing food in the center of the fire circle, offering one's tools to the group, or bowing before elders, allowed guilt to be released and trust rebuilt. These acts transformed betrayal from a permanent fracture into a lesson in morality. Guilt then was not only destructive but constructive, capable of rebuilding the group stronger than before. Stories of betrayal became cultural memory. Around the fire, tales of the one who betrayed and the price they paid were retold to children. These narratives carried weight, reminding listeners that loyalty was sacred and betrayal costly. Guilt lived on in these stories, shaping future generations before they ever faced temptation. In this way, the echoes of betrayal traveled across time, embedding conscience into the heart of humanity. The psychological experience of betrayal and guilt is profound. To betray is to feel split within oneself, the momentary satisfaction of selfish gain shattered by the enduring pain of conscience. The guilty mind replays the act, searches for justification, and finds only emptiness. This internal conflict shapes the moral self, teaching restraint, empathy, and loyalty. Without betrayal, humans might never have learned the depth of conscience. Without guilt, betrayal would remain uncorrected and trust would vanish. The echoes of betrayal are also universal. Whether in the Paleolithic camp, the Neolithic village, or the modern world, betrayal carries the same sting and guilt the same weight. The prehistorical lessons endure because they speak to something timeless: the sacredness of trust, the fragility of community, and the power of guilt to transform error into wisdom. Thus, betrayal in prehistory was not simply a practical failure but a moral revelation. Guilt ensured that betrayal was remembered, that lessons were carried forward, and that trust was defended with vigilance. The echoes of betrayal shaped the architecture of human society, reminding individuals that loyalty was not optional but essential, not convenience, but survival. And so, when the first human betrayed another, the world shifted. The wound was not only social but moral, not only practical, but existential. The echoes reverberated through minds and memories, awakening guilt, forging conscience, and teaching that to betray is to endanger the very fabric of life itself. The echoes did not fade, they became the foundation of morality, carried forward in every generation, in every story, in every act of trust renewed. Among all the echoes of guilt in prehistory, one of the most tender and revealing must have been the moment when children first learned to apologize. To imagine this moment is to glimpse the dawn of moral education, the first stirrings of a conscience carried not only by individuals but passed deliberately from one generation to the next. Apology is more than a word, more than a gesture. It is the recognition that harm has been done, the acceptance of responsibility, and the desire to mend what has been broken. For early humans, the act of apology was a seed planted in the minds of children, shaping the moral landscape of humanity itself. Picture a small fire circle in the twilight. Adults speak softly, sharing food and stories while children play at the edges, imitating the movements of their elders. Suddenly, a quarrel erupts. One child snatches a toy-like stone from another or pushes too hard in rough play, drawing tears. The group notices. The parents pause. In that moment, the lesson of guilt and apology takes shape. The guilty child feels the weight of attention. The act has caused hurt, however small, and the group silently waits. An elder, perhaps a mother, perhaps a grandfather, gently prompts the child, "Give it back," or "Say sorry." In that moment, apology becomes a ritual. The child hesitates, for to admit guilt is frightening. But under the watchful eyes of the community, the child mutters a word, or makes a gesture of return, or lowers the head in shame. And in response, the injured child accepts, the group nods, and balance is restored. What seems a simple exchange is, in fact, monumental, the first teaching of moral repair. Apology is not instinctive. Young children resist it, often clinging to pride or fear. Yet the repetition of apology, guided by adults, plants deep seeds of conscience. The child learns that wrong actions leave a mark not only on others but on the self. To apologize is to release that mark, to rejoin the circle, to regain belonging. Without apology, guilt festers. With apology, it transforms into growth. For prehistoric families, the teaching of apology was survival itself. A group in which quarrels lingered or grudges festered was weaker, vulnerable to division. Children had to learn quickly that harmony mattered more than stubbornness. Apology thus became a social technology, passed on with care, ensuring that each new generation understood the cost of harm and the power of repair. Anthropologists have studied how apology functions in traditional societies. It is rarely about individual pride and more about communal balance. To say, "I am sorry," is less about inner feelings than about restoring unity. In prehistory, this was even more true. Apology was not about private emotion but about visible action. A child's apology, whether whispered or acted out through the return of an object, was a signal to the group. Harmony is more important than conflict. Guilt was acknowledged, repair achieved, trust renewed. Consider the emotional journey of a child learning to apologize. At first, there is only resistance, the stubborn refusal to admit wrongdoing. Then comes the gentle guidance of elders, the soft insistence that apology is necessary. The child yields, often reluctantly, but feels the release when forgiveness is granted. Over time, the lesson sinks deeper. The child comes to understand that apology is not humiliation but restoration, not weakness, but strength. In this way, guilt becomes a teacher, and apology its companion. The act of apology also shaped culture in subtle ways. Around the fire, stories of quarrels and forgiveness were told, teaching children that even great mistakes could be repaired with honesty and humility. Rituals may have reinforced this lesson, perhaps a gesture of offering food, or touching the hand of the wronged companion, or bowing the head before the group. These symbolic acts carried weight, embedding apology into the rhythm of daily life. Guilt and apology together created the architecture of moral memory. A child who learned to apologize also learned to empathize. They felt not only their own shame but the pain of the one they had hurt. This empathy deepened over years, becoming the foundation of adult conscience. To apologize was to step into the shoes of another, to see the world through their suffering, and to affirm the bond of community. Without such lessons, empathy might never have taken root so deeply in human hearts. But apology was never easy. Sometimes children resisted, clinging to pride. Sometimes apologies were insincere, offered only under pressure. Sometimes forgiveness was not immediately granted. These moments too taught important lessons, that words must be genuine, that healing takes time, that guilt cannot be erased without effort. The complexity of apology mirrored the complexity of human life itself, preparing children for the deeper trials of adulthood. Philosophically, the teaching of apology reveals something profound about humanity. Animals can feel fear, anger, even affection, but only humans created rituals of moral repair. To apologize is to acknowledge an invisible realm, the realm of trust, fairness, and justice. Children learning to apologize were stepping into this invisible world, guided by guilt, shaped by love, and bound by community. The echoes of those first childhood apologies still reach us today. Every time a parent bends down to tell a child, "Say sorry," they are repeating a lesson tens of thousands of years old. Every time a child hesitates, then whispers the word, they are echoing the same struggles of prehistoric children. And every time forgiveness is given, the circle of trust is renewed, just as it was around the ancient fire. Apology, then, is not small. It is the foundation of morality, the seed of conscience, the visible form of guilt transformed into growth. Without apology, guilt would remain unspoken, festering in silence. With apology, guilt becomes the beginning of wisdom. Humanity's moral journey owes much to the tender, trembling voices of children learning for the first time to say, "I am sorry." And so we see that guilt, when paired with apology, does not destroy but heals. It does not divide but unites. In the small dramas of children quarreling and reconciling, humanity discovered one of its greatest treasures, the ability to repair, to forgive, to begin again. The prehistoric lesson continues in us all. When the day's hunt was done, when the children had finally settled into sleep, and when the embers of the fire glowed like a heart beating in the darkness, something profound often happened among early humans. Around that circle of light, where shadows flickered against cave walls or open plains, people spoke. They spoke of hunts and dangers, of dreams and fears, of stories from ancestors and spirits. But sometimes, in the hush of the fire's warmth, they also confessed. Confession is the act of revealing a hidden weight, of bringing into the open what guilt has locked away. It is one of the most uniquely human acts, for it requires language, memory, and the courage to expose one's inner self to others. To confess is not merely to speak of wrongdoing. It is to risk rejection, to trust the group with one's shame, and to seek healing, not alone, but together. Imagine such a night. The hunters have returned with meat, the gatherers with roots and berries. The bellies of the clan are full, and silence stretches, punctuated only by the snapping of the firewood. Then one person clears their throat. Perhaps they had failed during the hunt. Perhaps they had stolen a scrap of food. Perhaps they had lashed out in anger earlier that day. Whatever the cause, the guilt weighs heavily. And in that moment, they choose to confess. The fire is witness. The group listens. Words are halting at first, but then spill forth like water released from a dam. The speaker admits their fault, lowering their eyes, exposing their vulnerability. For a heartbeat, the group is silent. Judgment hangs in the air. But then, a nod, a murmured forgiveness, an elder's gentle touch. The burden, once heavy, begins to lift. Why would confession arise in prehistory? Because guilt, when locked inside, corrodes. It eats at trust, twists relationships, makes the guilty one feel like an outsider. By speaking aloud, the burden is shared and the possibility of repair opens. Confession is not only personal relief, it is communal medicine. The fire became more than warmth and light, it became a place of truth. Anthropologists note that in many traditional societies, confession is woven into ritual. Around fires, in sacred spaces, or before elders, people reveal their misdeeds not only to cleanse themselves but to protect the group from invisible harm. Wrongdoing, if unspoken, was believed to disturb the balance of the world. Spirits, ancestors, or unseen forces might punish the entire group if guilt remained hidden. In prehistory, such beliefs could easily have surrounded confession, giving it a sacred weight. But beyond belief, confession had practical value. A hunter who lied about where he hid food or who shirked his duty threatened group survival. If guilt lingered unspoken, trust might break. Confession restored transparency. By admitting fault, the guilty ones signaled their commitment to honesty and belonging. In return, the group, by forgiving, signaled that trust could be repaired. The cycle of harm and healing turned, and survival was strengthened. There is also something deeply psychological here. To confess is to lighten the heart. To keep guilt secret is to carry a private burden, heavier each day. But to release it into words before the fire and the faces of loved ones is to find relief. Early humans may not have had the language we do, but they had gestures, tones, tears, silences, all forms of confession. Even without structured words, the truth could be spoken and the burden eased. Think of the courage required. To confess is to risk. The group might reject, punish, or exile. Yet the act itself was also a demonstration of humility. To kneel, to bow the head, to weep before others, these were gestures of honesty that touched the hearts of those who listened. For in confession, everyone recognized themselves. Each person had felt guilt. Each had stumbled, faltered, harmed. The one who confessed spoke not only their own truth but a truth shared by all, that to be human is to err. The fire then became a sacred circle of honesty. Its light created a space where shadows of guilt could be revealed. The flickering flames mirrored the fragile, flickering courage of confession. The warmth was not only physical but emotional, enveloping those who dared to bare their hearts. Around that fire, guilt was transformed into connection. Philosophically, confession reveals one of humanity's deepest paradoxes. We hide our faults out of fear, yet healing comes only by revealing them. We fear rejection, yet only by exposure do we find belonging again. Confession is the bridge across this paradox. It teaches that vulnerability, rather than strength, is what binds us most deeply. Modern echoes of these fireside confessions remain. We confess to friends, to family, to partners. We confess in religious rituals, in therapy sessions, in whispered late-night conversations. The relief is the same, the courage required is the same, the fear and the hope are the same. Though thousands of years have passed, the essence of confession has not changed. It is still the firelight of truth. And so we see guilt not as an enemy, but as a teacher. It drives us to speak, to admit, to seek repair. Without guilt, there would be no confession. Without confession, wounds would deepen. But with both, healing becomes possible, and the circle of trust is renewed. The fireside confessions of prehistory were not only about survival. They were about meaning. They were about the recognition that humans are not perfect, that mistakes are inevitable, and that forgiveness is essential. In this way, guilt carved out a space for one of the most profound human acts, the sharing of truth in the face of fear. Every flicker of firelight on those ancient nights was a reminder: to confess is to free oneself, to rejoin the group, to honor the bond of humanity. The fire still burns in us today, whenever we whisper our truths into the dark, seeking the light of forgiveness. At some point in humanity's long journey, guilt stopped being only a private feeling or a fireside confession. It began to shape rules, invisible lines drawn in the minds of the group. These lines were the beginnings of law. Not written laws, not carved on stone tablets or recorded in codes, but living laws carried in memory, enforced by custom, reinforced by shame, and guarded by guilt itself. Imagine a small band of hunter-gatherers. They live closely, their survival intertwined. Every act of generosity or selfishness echoes through the group. If someone takes more food than they deserve, it is noticed. If someone fails to guard the fire, it endangers all. If someone harms a fellow member, it risks not only the victim but the entire cohesion of the band. Guilt, first felt as an inner weight, soon becomes a mechanism for order. But guilt alone was not enough. People needed shared standards, a sense of what was right and what was wrong. These unwritten rules arose from necessity. Sharing food became not just generosity but obligation. Respecting elders was not just courtesy but duty. Protecting children was not just instinct but law. And when someone broke these rules, the group's response was more than anger. It was moral outrage, accompanied by shame, exile, or punishment. In this way, guilt helped give birth to the first proto-laws. They were not enforced by kings or judges but by the group's collective conscience. Every member carried the responsibility to uphold them, and guilt ensured compliance even when no one was watching. It was, in a sense, humanity's first invisible police force, a voice inside, whispering warnings before the act, punishing after it. The significance of this shift cannot be overstated. Once humans learned to channel guilt into rules, society itself could grow. A group no longer relied solely on personal trust or kinship. They had shared standards that outlasted individuals. These proto-laws bound strangers, cousins, and in-laws alike. They created predictability. You knew what was expected, and you knew the weight of guilt should you fail. Archaeology gives us hints of this moral order. Burial practices, for instance, show consistent respect for the dead across vast times and spaces. To neglect the dead, to leave a body exposed, might not only draw guilt but also invite punishment from the group or imagined spirits. Such customs reveal an early sense of law rooted in guilt. There were right ways to act, and to defy them was to risk both inner torment and outer consequence. As bands grew into tribes, these rules expanded. Taboos arose, prohibitions against eating certain foods, touching sacred objects, or breaking ritual purity. Behind every taboo was a sense of guilt waiting to strike if violated. Some anthropologists argue that guilt became sacred law, transformed into the will of spirits, ancestors, or gods. This made it even more powerful. Guilt was no longer just a personal emotion but a force tied to the cosmos itself. Here we glimpse the birth of law in its oldest form, moral codes shaped by guilt, carried in stories, enforced in rituals, and etched into memory. Unlike instinctual fear, which fades when the danger is gone, guilt lingered, ensuring that the lesson was not forgotten. It reminded the individual again and again, you must not stray from the rules of the group. Yet this new power brought new complexity. Guilt was both a protector and a tyrant. On one hand, it created stability. On the other, it could trap people in invisible chains. What if someone broke a rule accidentally? What if a taboo was unknowingly violated? The guilt could be just as crushing, even when no real harm was done. And so law began to require not only rules but systems of forgiveness and atonement. This is why rituals of cleansing, penance, or sacrifice often accompanied the birth of proto-law. They were ways to manage guilt, to release its grip when it became unbearable. The group recognized that guilt was necessary, but also that it needed outlets. Without release, guilt could destroy the very cohesion it was meant to protect. Over thousands of years, these unwritten proto-laws evolved into more formal structures. Shamans, elders, and eventually chiefs became guardians of custom. They judged disputes, declared punishments, and decided when forgiveness was granted. Guilt, once a purely inner feeling, had now become institutionalized. It was part of society's very framework, invisible but ever-present. The step from guilt to law is one of the most defining transitions in human history. It transformed small groups into larger, stable communities. It allowed cooperation to extend beyond family, beyond kin, into villages, tribes, and eventually nations. Without guilt, there would have been no trust to hold those structures together. Without law, guilt would have remained a private torment. Together, they forged the foundations of civilization. And yet, as we reflect, a paradox remains. Law is born of guilt, but it also creates guilt. Once rules exist, they generate new opportunities to fail, to stumble, to fall short. The more rules, the more guilt. The human heart became increasingly burdened not only by what it naturally felt but by what society demanded. This tension would shape the course of human history, from tribal taboos to religious commandments to modern legal codes. In the end, guilt and law are inseparable twins. Guilt breathes life into law, and law keeps guilt alive. Around prehistoric firesides, this cycle began, a cycle that continues today in our courts, our rituals, and in the quiet voice of conscience that still speaks within us. Guilt is not a fleeting thing. Unlike hunger, which ends with food, or thirst, which ends with water, guilt lingers. It clings to memory like smoke to fabric, refusing to dissipate even after the fire is gone. In the deep past, this persistence gave guilt its strange power. It was not simply about the act itself, but about how that act lived on inside the human mind, reshaped, retold, and remembered. Picture a hunter who failed his companions. Perhaps he panicked and abandoned his brother in the face of danger. Perhaps he ate too much of the scarce meat, leaving others hungry. The event itself may have lasted only moments. Yet, long after the tribe moved on, the memory followed him. Around the fire, in the silence of night, in the eyes of others, he would feel it. The wrong had passed, but its shadow remained. This is the unique cruelty and gift of guilt. It creates a continuity between past and present. One does not simply act and move on. One carries. Every remembered wrong becomes a stone in the pockets of the mind, each step forward heavier. And yet, this burden was also a teacher. The memory of guilt prevented mistakes from repeating. Where fear warns of what might come, guilt reminds of what already happened. Together, they created a feedback loop that shaped human behavior across generations. Among early human groups, this weight of remembered wrongs became part of collective memory as well. A betrayal was not only personal, it was spoken of, retold, etched into the shared history of the group. Do not be like him, the elders might whisper to children, pointing to the man who once abandoned his brother. His guilt became a cautionary tale. His shame was carried not only by him but by the community that remembered. In this way, guilt reached beyond the individual. It became transpersonal, shared, inherited, even weaponized. Sometimes one person's wrong was remembered for years, even decades. It lived longer than the act itself. Wrongdoings were carved into story, myth, and legend. Long ago someone failed, and we still bear the scars. The memory of guilt could transcend generations, shaping taboos and traditions long after the original event had been forgotten in detail. This persistence gave guilt its double edge. On one side, it ensured caution and morality. On the other, it threatened to imprison people in the past. The burden of remembered wrongs could suffocate, trapping individuals in endless cycles of self-punishment. The wrong once done could never be undone. For some, the memory was too much to carry. And so, early humans sought ways to lighten this weight. Rituals of forgiveness, cleansing, or symbolic repayment began to emerge. A wrong could not be erased, but perhaps it could be balanced. A gift, a sacrifice, an act of service, these became ways to ease the memory. Even if the tribe remembered, the individual could find relief through acknowledgement and atonement. Guilt demanded not only inner suffering but outward gestures of repair. But there is another layer here, one far more haunting. Sometimes the weight of remembered wrongs outlived the people themselves. Imagine a tribe that once abandoned a member to die, leaving a scar in their collective conscience. For years, perhaps centuries, the story might echo, "Once we did this. We must never do it again." The guilt of ancestors became a guiding star for descendants. The dead whispered warnings to the living, not through ghosts but through the memory of their failures. Philosophers much later would call this moral history, the sense that humanity carries not only personal guilt but collective guilt. Even before philosophy had words for it, prehistoric groups felt it. Wrongdoing was not isolated. It rippled outward, embedding itself into tradition and story. Memory ensured that guilt was never only about the moment, it was about what lingered after, what stayed in the marrow of the tribe. Consider too how guilt shaped the human imagination. To remember wrongs is to replay them. To replay them is to imagine how they could have gone differently. Thus, guilt gave rise not only to regret but to counterfactual thinking. If only I had done this instead. This mental rehearsal became a tool of survival. Guilt taught humans to not only remember but to project, to learn by imagining alternate futures. Out of guilt's weight came creativity, foresight, and moral reflection. Yet the burden was never light. For every lesson learned, there was also torment endured. The hunter who betrayed his brother might spend years reliving the moment, punished more severely by memory than by any external authority. The mother who failed to save her child might carry the guilt until her dying day, shaping not only her own choices but the choices of those who watched her grief. This lingering quality of guilt is what makes it unique among emotions. Anger explodes, then fades. Joy lifts, then drifts away. Fear spikes, then calms. But guilt roots itself in memory, binding the past to the present. It refuses to leave quietly. And because of this, it became a sculptor of human morality. The weight of remembered wrongs ensured that humans never forgot the cost of failure. It tied individuals to their own actions, tribes to their shared past, and entire cultures to stories of guilt and redemption. Without this persistence, morality might have been fleeting. With it, morality became enduring. Even today, we live in this inheritance. Nations carry guilt for wars long past. Families carry guilt for ancestral choices. Individuals carry guilt for moments no one else remembers. The prehistoric gift of guilt, its stubborn refusal to vanish, still shapes us, binding us to our histories, both personal and collective. The story of guilt is not only about the moment it was first felt. It is about how that moment echoed forever, refusing to die. The first human who felt guilt unknowingly gave birth to a burden that would follow every generation after, the weight of remembered wrongs. If guilt is a wound of the mind, then redemption is its attempt to heal. Long before organized religion, long before priests and laws, humans were already seeking ways to balance the scales of their conscience. The first time guilt was felt, the second question must have soon followed: how can it be undone? Of course, the act itself could never be erased. A wrong committed remained carved in time. But humans discovered that the weight of guilt could be eased, not removed, but transformed. Redemption, in its earliest form, was not about divine forgiveness or abstract morality. It was about relationships, about repairing the fragile bonds that guilt had fractured. Imagine the hunter who took more meat than his share. The tribe is angry, and he feels the heavy silence of their disapproval. Alone, he knows survival is impossible. So he tries something new. He offers the next kill entirely to the others. He refuses to eat, or he hunts for days, bringing back more than expected. The balance begins to shift. The memory of his wrongs still lingers, but his gestures soften the edges. This is redemption at its most primal, the attempt to return to belonging through sacrifice. Early humans learned that guilt could not be survived in isolation. It demanded reconciliation. Redemption was a social negotiation, a way of proving to others that trust could be rebuilt. Out of this, rituals and customs began to form. Over time, groups may have developed traditions for atonement, fasting, offering food, giving away prized tools, or enduring a punishment without protest. These rituals were not arbitrary. They were inventions of survival, designed to keep guilt from tearing communities apart. But redemption was not only outward. It was also inward. The guilty person needed not only forgiveness from others but also a way to forgive themselves. And so began the inner struggle of redemption, a battle within memory, a conversation with one's own conscience. In this sense, redemption became humanity's first dialogue with the self. To be guilty was to be divided inside. To seek redemption was to attempt unity again. Think for a moment about how revolutionary this was. No other animal seeks to repair wrongs with intention. No wolf apologizes for taking food. No lion seeks forgiveness for a failed defense. But humans, fragile, small, and dependent on each other, could not afford the luxury of indifference. Redemption was survival. And in seeking it, humans invented the idea of moral repair, a seed that would grow into everything from apology to justice to ritual cleansing. Redemption also gave guilt its purpose. Without the possibility of repair, guilt would only destroy. With redemption, guilt became transformative. It became not just a punishment but a path. The memory of the wrong could still wound, but it could also inspire acts of generosity, courage, and care. In this way, redemption turned suffering into growth. Consider a mother who failed to save her child from danger. She might carry that unbearable guilt forever. But perhaps because of it, she becomes fiercely protective of every other child in the group. Her guilt turns her into a guardian, someone who ensures no other mother suffers as she has. Redemption, in this sense, is not about undoing the past. It is about creating a future where the past need not repeat. Over generations, this search for redemption began to shape human culture in profound ways. Some groups likely developed ceremonies for cleansing guilt. A person who had wronged the tribe might be made to endure symbolic trials, bathing in cold water, walking through firelight, confessing publicly, or offering precious items to the group. These acts were less about the physical action and more about the symbolic transformation. The wrongdoer showed willingness to suffer, to pay, to bend, and in that humility, redemption became possible. Redemption also introduced the earliest seeds of forgiveness. To forgive is not natural, it is a conscious choice. For a tribe to accept someone back, they had to believe redemption was possible. And in granting it, they strengthened their bonds. Forgiveness became the mirror of redemption. One could not exist without the other. Philosophically, redemption also altered how humans viewed time. Guilt trapped people in the past. Redemption offered a bridge to the future. It whispered, yes, you failed, but you need not be only your failure. You can become something else. This possibility was profoundly human, the belief that we are not fixed creatures, that we can change. The first stirrings of this belief were born not from abstract optimism but from the raw necessity of survival in the face of guilt. But redemption was never guaranteed. Sometimes the wrong was too great. Sometimes the wound to trust could not be healed. A murderer within the tribe might find no path back. An act of betrayal might remain a scar that no gesture could erase. In such cases, guilt remained a permanent exile, both external and internal. Redemption, then, was not a certainty but a chance, fragile, precarious, and deeply human. And yet, its very existence changed the emotional landscape of early humans. Where animals had only instinct and reaction, humans developed a moral horizon. They could imagine not only punishment but also recovery. They could imagine not only wrong but also restoration. Redemption made morality dynamic, giving wrongdoers a reason to strive for better. It is no coincidence that later human religions would make redemption a central theme. From sacrifices to confession, from penance to pilgrimage, the structures of faith took what early tribes had already discovered and magnified it into cosmic scale. What began as a hunter offering his kill to restore trust became entire systems of ritual, meant to cleanse humanity's collective guilt. But long before temples and prayers, redemption was already alive around the fire. It was in the man who shared more than his share, in the woman who protected others after failing her own, in the elder who confessed a mistake so the young could learn. Redemption was woven into the fabric of human survival, shaping our relationships, our stories, and our very sense of self. In the end, redemption is what keeps guilt from crushing the soul. It does not erase the wrong, but it transforms the weight into something that can be carried, something that can even lead us forward. Without redemption, guilt would be a cage. With redemption, guilt becomes a teacher. And so, as we approach the final reflection, we see the arc of humanity's moral awakening, from the first spark of guilt to the heavy memory of wrongs, to the fragile, luminous hope of redemption. For the first time in the animal kingdom, creatures emerged who not only remembered their failures but who sought to turn them into something more. That search, the search for redemption, is one of the most profoundly human journeys of all.